upskilling initiatives from companies and colleges being undertaken under that umbrella. The government took notice and requested NASSCOM to extend FutureSkills, which was hitherto just limited to the IT industry, to all Indian citizens. And this was a partnership between the Ministry of IT and NASSCOM. Because even till 2 years ago, the number of projects the IT industry had in digital tech was only about 20 to 30%. And the distance between those who got it and those who didn't was quite wide. But COVID has changed all that. And we can all agree that the spotlight on digital has turned into a floodlight. And everyone from students in school to grandparents on Zoom have now understood what digital means. This also goes to non-IT companies because every vertical, whether it's healthcare, banking, manufacturing, retail, is going digital. Gartner did a study to say that digital skills are in demand across sectors and within roles that traditionally did not require them. Everybody doesn't need to learn how to code, but clearly there's a massive need for everyone to develop digital fluency on new age technologies. So what does this word digital fluency mean? It means an awareness of what the emerging tech is, what it does, and how it can be used. We have companies like Hindustan Levers, not a technology company, nothing one would associate with digital and science or anything like that. But they issued a press release just last week saying that they want to train the entire workforce on FutureSkills. So clearly, HUL sales reps are not going to become programmers and their factory workers are not going to get into IoT projects, but they saw enough of a need to issue a press release about it. So what does this mean, to talk about digital fluency, which is just as crucial as being digitally skilled? What does it mean for industry? What does it mean for academia? I have Dr. Sekar, Viswanathan, Dr. Prakash, Muthu, and they represent leading academic institutions. Vaishali Phatak represents industry. She's from Tech Mahindra, who have a huge workforce. And Amit Aggarwal, who leads the Sector Skills Council at NASSCOM. So a really nice, diverse crowd. I'll start my questions with Amit, saying, Amit, you, or should I say we, just launched FutureSkills Prime, a digital skilling platform along with METI. And there was a conscious decision during the design phase of FutureSkills Prime to provide content on digital fluency. I mean, we as an industry have been talking about reskilling and upskilling on digital skills, but what was the thought behind digital fluency?
Thank you, Kirti, and good evening, everyone, especially Dr. Viswanathan, Vaishali, Sai Prakash. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. You know, one of the big changes that happens in how people learn is that you have to build a mental map. And until you have built a mental map, it's very difficult to actually go deep in a topic. Given the massive changes that are happening in technology, where 8 to 10 different technologies are coming together and changing the world, a lot of people are really struggling to get that basic mental map in place on how is the world of the future going to be different from the world of today. And in that world of the future, what am I going to do? How does it apply to me? If I'm thinking of a job in a certain industry, is that job going to change? So for example, there's a young student who lives below where I stay, and he was always keen to do automotive engineering. And now you think about it, electric cars, the entire automotive engineering syllabus is changed completely. There's almost no academic institute in India actually that can now teach that. And so they are also reinventing themselves to be able to teach that. And that's really where this whole need for every Indian citizen to understand digital comes in. To understand what are the technologies, to understand how they are progressing, where they came from, how they combine together. And that is why we felt that when we launch any initiative, whether it was with our industry first, other industries, or with college students, the first thing that everybody should get exposure to really is what is the world of the future going to look like in small bites so they can each build their mental map. So that was really the purpose of digital fluency. And as we thought on the platform today, that's where everybody's going first. So there's almost 18,000 badges have been in the last 2 months that the platform's been live, that's really where everyone's gone first. So yeah.
And it's a conversation where whenever we bring it up with people, there's almost a relief that, oh my God, now there's someplace I can go and actually learn something about all this mystical stuff. But I think when we come to academia and when we come to an institution which is almost all the degrees that are offered are BScs and BTechs. So Dr. Sekar, what do you think of this approach to skilling, this idea of these mind maps, the digital mindset, which creates the digital mind map, to building a high level focus on these technologies? What is your view, given that you've been focusing on these degrees thus far?
Hi, Kirti. Thank you. Good evening to all of you. So at VIT, we have been focusing a lot on the upskilling of the students. As you started pointing out the Gartner study, and there have been many more studies which talk about, the future of jobs, and the conventional job roles are going to disappear. The new job roles are going to emerge. And are we preparing our students for the future, or are we just preparing the students for the past? So, for example, 3D printing or product design with digital manufacturing skills would enable a mechanical engineering student. As Amit was pointing out, car is no longer just a mechanical thing. It's a computer. It's a moving computer, right? So you need to have electrical skills, you need to have programming skills, you need to have hardware skills in order to design a car or be a mechanical engineer. So what we do is, we at VIT, we train, for example, mechanical engineering students with product design of the NASSCOM FutureSkills course, because we don't want to teach the conventional, how a internal combustion engine works. The internal combustion engine is going to go away. The first time when I went to US and I saw the Tesla car, I opened it. I don't know where the engine is and all that. And somebody sitting in the living room with his cell phone, he started his car with his cell phone. And I was really amazed. I mean, it could lead to dangerous consequences if you're going to drive your car with the cell phone. But the technology has changed so much. We just not only need to keep up as education institutions, we need to be ahead of the curve, working along with the industry and the industry associations like NASSCOM. So that's why we keep emphasizing that all the non-computer science engineering students need to have programming skills. Programming is not just for computer science, right? It's like English. It's a tool which you use to express. So programming language becomes your tool for expression, whether you're a mechanical engineer or a chemical engineer or a civil engineer, and you got to survive in the future. So all this future skills are very, very important. And we have put 7,000 plus students and 150 faculty members of VIT are currently in the NASSCOM Future Skills course, and we are planning to add many more. And coming back to your other question about BScs and BTechs, of course, VIT has realized that we got to diversify. So we have started many other programs like BA and agriculture and all that. But there also, even if you go to agriculture, we are going to teach them how to use drones for mass agriculture, right? Agriculture cannot be without technology. The conventional agriculture techniques have to change. So everywhere you go, you're going to have technology as your tool. I'll stop here right now.
Yes, and I think you have actually, your institution is one of those that has really very deeply engaged with the FutureSkills platform, trying to dovetail it with all the other things that you're doing. And we keep using your example when we're talking to other colleges, saying this is the way to integrate it, because the conventional stuff will carry on, but the digital overlay that needs to come across all verticals is something that I guess all colleges will get to soon enough. But Dr. Sai Prakash, I think y'all are also doing a lot of work in this, in creating this digital mindset in your students. So what has been your approach of building this in the core engineering domains that they study?
First of all, very good evening to all, and it's very nice to see Sekar and Amit after a long time. So our lockdown has taught us many lessons, and this Zoom is a major lesson which has been taught through. This is the best digital which we have learned.
Yes.
Otherwise, we would have, this was available earlier, but we didn't use this. And we realized that it's thanks to Corona. There are many positive which has been done by Corona. When Amit has said, and when Sekar has said about Tesla, and the technology which has been evolved, not only our curriculum, even industry, we are way back in the future skill has given a lot of opportunity. When 2018, I think in February, when PM launched this future skill, it was only to business. So they were giving only for, on that day itself, I requested it has to reach colleges. See, we are creating engineers, they should come with skills. That is what it's more important. Hiring them, giving them the job and spending on their skills, it's an Herculean task which we are mismanaging. So thanks to NASSCOM, which has brought those to colleges. After we are following the footstep of VIT, after VIT, we have also had that opportunity of our students. I can say that our Sairam students have completed 1 lakh courses in this lockdown, and we got a Guinness World Record for that.
Amazing. We heard about that you've been into the Guinness Book of World Records, the number of
Yes.
certified.
The credit goes to the students. See, we are sending them to the war, and we have to make them equipped with the weapon. The digital weapon is, they should have the digital things. Fortunately, in 2019, September 5th, being our 25th Silver Jubilee, we gifted all our faculty with a tab. So that has been a game changer for us. They were digitally equipped during that time. All our classrooms have been, we have made Google Classroom for all our classes. Then allowing them to learn, we should make that platform for them. That is what I feel. Students, yes, they will be mischievous. That is an adolescent age. We have also come across of that. I realize that giving them the opportunity, they are the best user of that opportunity. Learning opportunity is now available for everyone. YouTube, you can, from RDX to the ISRO rocket launch, you can learn from YouTube. NPTEL, IIT is doing fantastic job by NPTEL, but learning opportunities available for everyone. Earlier, this was restricted for few people. Only people with Harvard and Cambridge will be able to have access of this. Today with e-journals, everything is available. We have to make the track for them, and we have equipped that. We have seen the success. Soon, as Sir said, you take Apple and Tesla. They are not a hardware company anymore. They are amalgamation of software and hardware. Both. So we given 2 halls which has been named after Apple and Tesla. We want to inspire the students. So they have to make sure that what is happening. We have to tell them what is happening around them. If there is a movie launch, every student will be aware about that. If there is a Tesla is coming to India by mid of 2020. We are also eagerly waiting to see whether our roads are equipped for that. So we have implemented the SDG goals of UN to our campus, which has made an easy way of approach for students. Goal number 7 is affordable and clean energy. So they can make that electrical students are doing their projects aligned with one of the goal, where we have to connect the dots. That is what digital. Connecting dots. That is what digital. We are traveling in a right path, but it's a long way to travel. There will be a changes which will happen every day, every minute. We have to update ourselves. Otherwise, we will be outdated. That is what digital learning is all about.
Well, a long journey always starts with the first step. So that's good news. And I think the idea of making it a living in a campus where these ideas are around you, wherever you go, that's really important. I think that whole thing of drilling it into your mind at an unconscious level is as powerful as sitting in a classroom and learning. Vaishali, over to you, because you've heard what academic institutions are doing to prepare students for the future. As an employer and one of India's largest employers, what are you looking for when you hire someone? Is digital fluency an asset for a prospective employee?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Kirti, and good evening, Amit, Prakash, Sekar. It has been really wonderful listening to all of you and seeing the convergence which is coming up between the academia, industry, and the leader like NASSCOM body. So, yeah, Kirti, definitely digital fluency is an asset, and I'll tell why. Because if you look at the business and the technology landscape, which has changed a lot, and with COVID, we'll see there is a dramatic change which has happened. Like COVID has shaken us out of our comfort zone, and though the sectors had started digital transformation, but the pace at which now it is happening is far, far more than it was maybe 2 years back or 3 years back. And as you rightly said, every sector, that may be retail, may be banking, healthcare, hospitality, and even education now, we are listening like how the faculty and the students and the entire campuses are getting digital savvy. So I think it has, the digital transformation has become the key driver for success, I would say. And what the customers are really looking out for, the people who are agile, who can adapt to new business processes, new policies, who can come out with the solutions. So they are no more looking at the people who are just the followers or the order takers. They're really looking at the people who can provide the thought leadership, who can provide the solutions, and who can partner in that entire transformation journey for the customers. I think that's where we are also seeing the change in the customer behavior, customer expectations. And when we look at the IT industry or IT organizations, we being the partner, our job is how can we really provide the right fit talent for the customers, for the industry. That's where the expectations. So when we are hiring, I think some of the fundamental attributes remain the same, like attitude and the learning aptitude and the passion, commitment. Means there is no to say about it. Like it has to continue the way it was, but more or less, I think a lot of focus on integrity, trust, because so many things are happening in the digital. If you look at the banking transactions, so that these softer aspects are also making equal impact when we are talking. Second aspect we always look about, that how the person is investing in herself or himself, especially when we are looking at the fresher hiring. So have they learned anything extra apart from their regular syllabus? Have they done any certifications? Have they done any projects? Are they using any platforms, say FutureSkills? Are they learning something which is beyond their academic defined scope? And are they really thinking through differently? Are they participating in any hackathons? Are they putting up any projects, any new ideas? So that's what we look when we are hiring the freshers specifically. And another aspect is, I'll just share an example. What we look at is the learning aptitude. So we have a person named Satish, who is arts graduate. He was an Uber driver, but he was learning Python by himself, complete self-learning. And while in one of the rides with one of our leaders, he was exchanging about automation and what all can be done and all, and we picked him up. And now he is one of the major contributor in one of our smart city projects.
Fantastic. How fantastic is
Yeah,
that?
so I think that digital proficiency and the passion for learning, keeping something new and thinking about solution, that what matters. So digital proficiency, I would say we look in two aspects. One is about all these, I won't call it as future because these are all in things like cloud, IoT, AR, VR, blockchain, 3D printing. So whether people are really learning this, and not only about learning the concepts, but can they at least think about how these concepts can be applied to our everyday life. We are not expecting them to implement it, but at least if they can think about how it can be applied for your day-to-day life problem solving. That's one aspect of digital fluency, I would say. And the other aspects, again, especially from COVID, is are they in a position to use the digital tools for that matter? Like Sir said that Zoom was there and we were not been able to use that, but are they being able to use the digital way of working? Are they conversant with different tools? Are they responsible enough to use the social media, because which is again one of the digital components? So are they responsible enough? Are they aware about basic data privacy and information security aspects? Because all these also cover the digital part. So I think this is one of the focus when we especially look out for the freshers and hiring, but digital definitely, I don't think it is any choice. It is must to have skill now for everybody, irrespective of the IT. Means any fresher, as sir said, whether he's joining mechanical or civil or whichever stream it may be, I think nobody can leave without having the basic digital proficiency.
Well, thanks for that. And I think you've tied up the conversation really nicely from creating those mind maps. Like you said, it's about thinking. If you know the application technology, then you can think about that. You're no longer looking at order takers, you're looking at people who can look for solutions. And you also brought out the really important point of the softer skills. We at FutureSkills, we decided not to call them soft skills because we said they are as important for the technical skills as
Absolutely.
softer skills are. So we actually labeled it professional skills.
Yeah.
And the point that I think was really important was the issue, the aspect of integrity and trust. Because as you get into these intelligent technologies, how you use them, how you leverage them, consequences they're going to have are things that you must think about. So thanks a lot for that. And I think perfect segue to Amit to say at one level, we say that even in the tech industry, we need fluency. But what about the non-tech industry? And I'll add on another question to that. When Vaishali mentioned all these professional skills, what was the thinking in FutureSkills when we put such a huge chunk of content in the platform around this? And how does it apply to, is there a difference between what happens in the IT industry versus what the non-IT industries need?
Sure. This is a very interesting one. I'll take the second question first. So, one of the very interesting, I guess, facts now in today's life is that the pace of change of technology is faster than human society can absorb. And that's the first time that's happened ever since humans have been there. So it typically takes us as societies about 7 years to absorb a change. And starting sometime around the 80s and 90s, the pace of change started to accelerate with new technology, new disruption, etc. coming in. And it is shorter than 7 years. So what this means actually is that you have to keep learning now, right? In order to stay relevant, in order to make your business be more profitable, in order to grow, in order to keep customers, etc. And if you have to keep doing this, then what the knowledge that you have of the technical aspects actually becomes less relevant. And what becomes more relevant for you to be able to keep adapting is some of these things which we are calling, whether it is soft skills or professional skills. And there is very interesting research that has already been done in terms of what are those critical ones, right? So the first one is basically collaboration. If you go back, and I'll take the Indian education system, historically, we have believed that group work is not good because one person will cheat from another person and then who knows how to market. But the reality is in today's world, there is research that shows that most of us do not actually know more than 50% of what is required to do our job. It used to be over 90% in the 1960s. So we are forced to rely on other people. By definition, it is just the nature of creation of something good. And if students have not learned to work together in project teams, then they're going to hit the workforce without actually being comfortable on how do you work together in a group. So it's as simple, it starts with that, collaboration, right? Let's take this aspect of communication. Suddenly, communication has changed from a time when you can sit across each other, there's body language, there's all of that happening, and now it's just on Zoom. So how are you going to energize someone? Take the case of faculty today, right? Just in terms of the skill they need. Many of us, when we go to learn something, we like sitting next to each other as students, right? That's part of the reason we go to college. Now that's gone. So faculty member has to be able to keep the attention of somebody sitting day in, day out on Zoom. How is that going to happen? It's a skill of communication, inspiring, etc. that faculty member has to learn on how are they going to keep somebody engaged. And that's true across the board, right? CEOs running large town halls with 30,000 employees where all events are virtual. How are you going to make that happen and inspire people? Design thinking, we're all used to doing, the kind of thinking which breaks a problem down into small pieces and then applies logic to it. That's historically what we've all done. Now, when you think of this new world where you can create a new solution, you have to imagine something that didn't exist. So this now is important, but as important or more important is creative problem solving. And creative problem solving requires empathy. It requires the ability to go out there and understand the consumer's needs. Many of these things aren't taught today. So how do you ensure that those skills are picked up? So those are three. There are 8 to 10 of these skills that are important, and as important or more important than the technical skills. I'll switch to the other one quickly in terms of other industry. I think, you mentioned Unilever. I'll take an example. About 7 years ago, it caught the world by storm. So I won't take the company's name, but a leading company that's actually a competitor of Unilever's. It's in the appliances space actually. So their chief marketing officer, right, this is a country based in Europe, stood up and said, we are not an appliance company, we're a digital company. And everybody laughed, right? This was 7, 8 years ago. No one got it. What is this guy saying? He makes washing machines, right? Why is he saying he's a digital company? And now today, if you reach out to any industry and you meet the CIO or you meet the CTO or you meet the CEO, they are likely to say that they are a digital company. And those firms that have got digital right are likely to do far better than those companies that don't have digital right. It is just a fact of life. Because everything for success now requires some digital component to go into it. Whether it is all the devices that we use in our house, whether it's all the products and the way they are distributed, whether it's a combination of human and machine that's providing a service. So I actually think it's a really exciting time for students today, where you have the whole world now literally for you to explore and learn and figure out where you want to build a career, how you want to leverage machines, how you want to leverage automation. And I'm just delighted that our education system is now rapidly moving fast with institutes like VIT, Sairam. There's 30, 40 institutes that are really making changes fast to make sure that our students are prepared for the world of the future. And as an industry body, I can say, and I think Vaishali will reinforce that the change we have seen in the last 5 years from the educational ecosystem, we will always demand more, but we are delighted with the way in which the industry is getting the kinds of students that it needs to start getting. So I want to end by just saying thank you to you all for making this happen. Kirti, over to you.
And I'm just wondering, Amit, the vintage, at least my vintage is more than yours, but what is the gyan that we give to our children? Because when you talk about an appliance company becoming a digital company, it was traditionally those marketing guys who did their MBAs who then went on to these companies. Now it's those engineering guys who they're going to be sought after because they're going to be running a totally different kind of company. The whole format has completely shifted, and we as parents have to shift along with it and really learn how to give proper advice to our bachas and to our nieces and nephews who think we know it all and we don't know whether we're saying the right thing. So actually the responsibility on you, Dr. Sekar and Dr. Sai Prakash, is really huge because you are really getting all our kids prepared for the future. So picking up from what Amit talked about, the criticality of these skills like design thinking and problem solving. So when we look at how curriculum is designed in your institutions, how much focus are we looking at these skills? And when we look at how teams are designed, where we look at T-shaped or somebody who knows broadly a lot and something in depth, does that also is that finding its place in the way curriculum is designed?
Yes. So at VIT, we constantly update our curriculum to fit the needs of the industry and society. And we definitely take into consideration various skills, the outcomes which are expected of our graduates. And as you were pointing out about the T-shape, where there is breadth and some depth, and which is now changed into the pie shape, where there's breadth and then many depths,
Yes.
Not just one depth, there is multiple, even the comb-shaped skill set. So we take all that into consideration. For example, we are right now going through a curriculum, upheaval, or I don't know, disruption, all this management.
There's disruption everywhere, so join the gang.
Yeah. So we make sure, for example, as I mentioned earlier, programming skills are given to all the students, not just computer science students, to the entire board. At least 2 languages. For now, it's going to be probably just Python and Java. But as times change, it needs to change. And we also focus heavily on what you used to call as soft skills, maybe we should call it as professional skills. It's there every semester where the students are taught about team skills, leadership skills. Those are all very important. And of course, English as a language, it's the best communication. So we use English for our communication. So there's a lot of importance given to those skills also. And we make sure there are many different forms of assessment. The traditional exam is only a smaller component. We want to make sure hackathons are in place. We want to make sure there's a lot of project-based learning and team-based projects. Amit was clearly talking about it. It's very important that the students learn how to work in a team. That's how the real world is. Nobody works in isolation. It's all connected network pieces. So we focus heavily on programming skills, the soft skills, communication skills, and of course the hard skills in different modes of assessment. I'm hoping that we will bridge the gap. Industry is always moving ahead fast, and we want to catch up. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to be ahead of the industry also in certain respects, collaborate with them. And NASSCOM is a great channel for us to catch up and move ahead with the industry. So that's our plan for curriculum change. And we cannot be sitting idle saying that, okay, we have designed the best curriculum, right? In a couple of years, it's outdated. So you got to be keep on meddling with it or fiddling with it, whatever you call it. It keeps happening. The tinkering keeps happening.
Well, like with the digital platforms that now we are using, I think the meddling and fiddling with it also becomes a little easier, a little faster. Resources are also easily available. But that whole pace of change, Dr. Sai Prakash, this and the fact that things are changing every 5 years, 7 years, call it what you will. But the aspect of continuous learning then, Vaishali also mentioned the idea of learning aptitude. Amit mentioned that the technology is going to keep changing. So it's your ability to learn that's going to be important. How does that find its way into how students are taught? Because we come from, at least the way we were taught in college and in school was very just, here's a book, read it up, mug it up, and you go and you're going to get your 98%.
No, I have to thank Vaishali for giving a right lead for that. Satish is the best example. See, being a cab driver, his continuous learning has put him in a smart project today. So, but Make in India is an...
We've lost you for a minute. Could the host just check what happened to Dr. Sai Prakash's audio? Can you try again? No, we've lost his audio.
Dr. Sai Prakash, could you please check?
Hello.
Yes, it's back.
Yeah, so that's a technical glitch. As Vaishali madam said, I think it's audible.
Yes.
But the Satish is the best example where we have to inspire students with that kind of story. Please share the details of Satish. We will ask him to address our students.
Sure, we can have a session by him.
That will be a great. These things, inspiration is continuous learning. See, you cannot, the books, what is there, it will be there. To create history, we need to have new inspirations and new learning skills. That's what we used to do. And that has given a huge change in student mind. See, we have to deal them with a psychological thing. The kids are more accessible to knowledge than the classroom. We have to accept the fact. The classrooms can only share the knowledge. I used to have a word with our faculties. Don't restrict to teach them what you know. Allow them to learn what we don't know. So we make that Tesla Discovery Channel 45 minutes video in the classroom, so that the discussion will be allowed among the students. There will be one who will be really skilled. Faculty can also learn from students. We have to unlearn and relearn. That as the industry has taught those things, and we have to accept the facts. As Amit sir said, collaboration. We had a tough time of having this digital content creation. where there is one faculty who had an extraordinary content, who has an hesitation to share that. I was really shocked. See, he want his A section to be the best in that. I want all are our kids. So coding is a new mathematics. We have schools. So we started coding from our school education, but that is not there in the curriculum. If you blame the curriculum, and that blaming game is over. If you want to make things to happen, you have to step forward. That single step with that coding skills new, we give that fits methodology, where we ask the students to feel the problem, identify, imagine a solution for those problem, and do things for that. That has been an ideal methodology, where we are not now asking them to learn. They are coming out with the new things. We are learning from them. That is how it happens. That's with the school student. With college is, that's how the industry also working. Industry, what an industry is doing, they are trying to help human life. That is how whole life, whether it starts from a vegetable vendor to an industrial car manufacturer, everyone is giving, they want to make others life easier, and they make use of that, and they earn money in that. That is how that mentality has totally changed among the system. There was some flaw in our system. We have to, industrial revolution 1 and 2 has given that carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide to our, so now they are asking to have that piece of Paris, and so every time there will be new things. Corona, when it started, they are given SOP which was totally changed after a point of time. Now you can, so if you are going to think what is right, go ahead with that. That skills, government and NASSCOM, they are trying to reskill 4 million IT people who have been already engaged. After a point of time, if they are not matching with their requirement, they are kicking them off. We cannot blame the industry. So it is the problem of the individual who has not made the effort to learn new things. If you are not going to learn new things, you are going to be unfit in that area. So we have to realize that lifelong learning, not only, even in our own kitchen, we see our mother who does try to do something new every day.
Yes.
We are not doing it, we will ask for, we will not accept that learning skill is not restricted in education. It is not restricted everywhere. We are looking forward for betterment. If you want to have a betterment, you have to come out with a new solution. If you want to have a new solution, you have to learn things. It's as simple as that. This digital learning, as madam pointed out, in our first semester we have become autonomous. So we have the flexibility of creating our own curriculum. We have brought that Facebook and your digital presence in our, the students are not aware about it. In WhatsApp,
Okay.
sharing unnecessary things. They are having, they don't have restriction. Many people have quit WhatsApp after you have been asked to share your personal data. We don't know what data that we have. Already we are sharing all those things. We have to be very cautious in what you are. There are faculty members, learner faculty members sharing their OTP. OTP is a digital. Today in UPI, if you are sharing an OTP, your bank account will be cleared. A six-digit number can make your life change. So
Yes.
these are digital. A fast tag. I never thought that India will be able to bring faster. We have seen many countries, and we are looking for those things to happen. The way it has been implemented, I support that. It has been fantastic. Today I traveled. There was no EHS anywhere. So that is a digital thing. It is possible. We have to implement in a right time, in an effective way. Those continuous learning will never stop. If you are stop learning, you will be outdated. That's what
So
I
I
think.
think that's the, if you as the leader of your institution can instill that, I think we're definitely on the right track. And I think along with Satish, I think we must have this story of the mother who is continuously learning in the kitchen. It brings it home to you what continuous learning is all about. So Vaishali, I'm going to ask the last question to you, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. That with
Sure.
all change happening, workforce planning must have completely transformed, whether it is
Yeah.
how you hire new people, how you plan for that, and what you do with the existing workforce as well. So, what are the changes that you think we need to be prepared for? I know you've been feel quite strongly about this idea of continuous learning. So,
Yeah. I think Amit and Sai Prakash, I think both they have touched two very important points. One is whether are we relevant in the business? I think that is the first question each one of us have to ask ourselves, irrespective of the sector again. are we relevant? And to remain relevant, are we unlearning, learning, reskilling, upskilling, cross-skilling? So I think that is the fundamental thing all of us have to keep in mind, and especially for the workforce, because we have to ensure that the workforce is ready for the future. So what we have done over here is like, we have something called as Fit for Future. The program what we run, we have taken the top roles which were defined by NASSCOM, that these are the roles which are critical ones and where we have to be people ready with that. And we have developed career maps along with those roles, that how the person would really grow in the organization on this career roles, career maps, with this all future or in demand skills, I would say. And then we are ensuring the people are continuously skilling on that. Second aspect, as Sekar said, that we are looking at the multi-skilled person. So that has become the currency, is that single skill person. We have to get the person multi-skilled, especially in the technical language, we call it as a full stack ready person, not only knowing the core Java, but Java, the backend, front end, middleware, testing, everything. So how can we really have a full stack ready professional? And this somewhere relates to the startup culture. Like in startup, if you see a person knows end to end everything, the person will sign the check as well as will sit, code, do design thinking, implement, test, everything. So that's what the culture we are trying to build. That's the mindset which we are trying to build, wherein anybody will be able to do entire multi-stack, full stack or full cycle, right from business analysis to implementation. I think that is the key. So maybe jack of all and master of at least one. That's what, or even that sir said, that T-shaped or pie-shaped. That is critically important for the people. Secondly, with COVID, what has happened, that on-site and offshore concepts, those boundaries are really getting blurred. Like there were few roles which were always customer facing, sitting in front of the customer and doing those roles. Many of those roles are now available for all the people. So initially people had constraints that if I am at this location, I won't be able to do that role. So I think those role boundaries are also now getting faded away. So people have got a lot more opportunities for that. Gig economy, which we were not sure whether it will pick up, but now that is also coming up, and customers are ready for having premium pay for people with best of the best skills. So people who are having right skills and right attitude are really going to rule the game, I would say. And that gig economy, wherein especially for the freshers, now many of them, they don't want to join a single company and work for that company for years. They may want to do the thing they love to do. They try to explore different things. They want to focus on multiple things. So soon the situation will come where this, especially the youngsters, they may work for 3 or 4 companies. And like we have a platform called as flex.ai, wherein we publish the work packages and anybody can come forward and take that work package, do it, and that's how. So that flexibility is definitely going to come. And I think the organizations have the major focus that how we remain relevant, whatever our existing workforce is or whatever this allied workforce, I would say, or the floating workforce, how we ensure that we give them the right platforms, right certifications, like Sekar mentioned about the assessments, like how we ensure that people are having the right assessments, right certification, the project knowledge, so that they see the path. It also gives confidence to the customer. And also people should not be complacent about that I am working in this project for a longer time, so my job is safe. So I think those days are gone. Every day you have to ask yourself that if you reappear for the job, will you get it or not? So I think that's important.
That's a powerful one, that if you were to apply for his job again, will you get it or not? Yeah. That's pretty eloquent. So I think we will stop here, and I'm going to pick up some questions from the audience now. Of course, the first one of them is that how can we access FutureSkills? That's an easy one. In the chat, there is a link, futureskillsprime.in. Please log in, and it's free to access. So there is nothing to stop you to start learning today. And you heard from the panel that it's absolutely crucial. We also getting a question on what could an undergraduate who has just started their studies do towards building a strong professional profile? I'll pass that question to you, Vaishali, because obviously they're building a profile to what does it mean for them.
So I think many of the colleges, as Sai Prakash said, that while learning the technical skill, that leadership or professional skills development is absolutely important. And many a times people just focus mainly on the technical skills. They mainly focus onto the exam scores or prepare themselves for only the engineering subjects. So that should not happen. That right from the first year itself, you can focus on the holistic development. That's what we always look for, that your leadership skills development, if you are from not from IT stream, but if you're from mechanical or civil or instrumentation, we call it as a domain knowledge. So whether you are having the right domain knowledge for that and the technical skills. So these three things, it has to be focused right from first year, because communication, writing skills are not something you can learn in a month's time. Like when you appear for the job interview and the feedback is given that your articulation is not right, so that you can't learn in a month. So you have to invest all your throughout your undergrad, you have to invest into your personality development, joining some finishing schools, and those things would definitely help. But especially the English, we see a lot of people, their English grammar itself is a problem. When we ask them to write essay or there is a comprehension, people fail in that while they are having a very good scores on technology subjects. So this is something really have to be focused on right from, if not done till 12th, at least from the first year of engineering.
Thanks for that. And very practical advice. Another interesting question, and I'll address that to Dr. Sekar Viswanathan, saying, what changes would you want to make to school curricula to better equip students to tackle the challenges of a highly technical undergraduate life and then a highly competitive professional realm?
Right. It's a very good question, because we face a lot of challenges when school kids come to university. I keep telling them that, unlike the school where there's a lot of spoon feeding, the university, you need to be a proactive approach. So the major changes which need to be done in the school curriculum is the way the approach, pedagogical approach needs to change. Lot of school children just focus on getting exam scores right. And a lot of it is just coaching. I mean, we have killed the childhood, sorry to say that, but we are all part of the system. All of us need to take the blame. But anyhow, coming back, I think we need to change the system where the students have the joy of learning, they enjoy and they assimilate, understand, and come up with new things. I mean, it need not be drastically new, as Vaishali was earlier pointing out, they need to be just able to apply some of the concepts to the other areas. So that coaching needs to go away and it needs to be teaching. And, that by heart, memory, and vomit, all that needs to change. I mean, both in higher education and in school education, particularly in school education. And I now see advertisements about ask your kids to learn coding in age of 3 or 4. That's ridiculous. We are putting undue pressure on our kids. Let them grow up properly. We need not put such pressure there. There is time to learn programming skills, but there's a lot more to learn. Ethics, values. There's a lot more to learn at the young age, at the holding age. So there's a lot to be done.
Maybe they need to play more and learn about collaboration and trust.
Yeah, not just online playing.
Get out there and play some football.
Natural light and air and play with the regular kids.
Okay, Amit, this question is for you because we're here. I'm seeing a lot of plaintive questions on the chat that how can people afford all this? These digital technologies, these courses are really expensive and it's very difficult. And how can we keep up for the ordinary individual? It's very tough. Response to that.
So, in general, one of the big changes that is happening is that content is becoming free. It's just a reality of life. It's just the way we saw mobile and data costs come down in India. The reality is content is becoming free. And whether it is this FutureSkills platform that we have, whether it is you go to an edX, you go to an Coursera, there's hundreds of places where you can actually learn for free. The challenge I think that many of us face is that when we have a lot of choice, we don't know what to study. And many times you freeze and you say, you know, should I do this or should I do that? Or it's not part of our curriculum. And then we say, okay, I already have my curriculum to do. Now can I do something extra? So I have three sort of thoughts to offer. One is that there are already a lot of people in India learning for free. The single largest consumer of edtech content, of free edtech content, is our country, India. Whether it is NPTEL, whether it is Swayam, whether it is edX, whether it is Coursera, whether it is FutureSkills, you name them, right? So Indians are finding ways. If you are proactive, you will find a way to study. That is one. Second suggestion I have to offer is actually for the university ecosystem, and I think, you know, it's changing slowly, is that a university is a place to come, but it should enable the whole universe's resources to be available, because they can be. And I think that is what the leading university has started to do now. It's exactly as Dr. Sai Prakash mentioned, that you're telling your students, go outside the syllabus. And if teachers feel confident allowing them to do that and to learn in areas they like, again, they will find it very easy to do. So the second thing is, with the new education policy, I think just the opportunities for people to experiment and do things differently will change. And as we encourage that, I think they will find a way to learn. And the third suggestion I have to offer is, right now, if you want to learn the foundations of the new technologies, if you want to get a lot of learning on digital, clearly you can come to FutureSkills. It has been actually brought to you by the government. You don't have to pay any money for it. And a lot of the courses have been curated by the industry and academic institutes working together. So you should actually just come there and learn. It's very easy to do that. Kirti, back to you.
Yes, I completely buy your point. In fact, when we go and tell people that FutureSkills Prime is available, one of the things we get is, what is there? Google is always there to find all the things you want. I think the challenge is Google is there, but you do one search in Google, you'll get 30 million responses. At least on FutureSkills, you'll get something which is contained and selected. So last question to you, Dr. Sai Prakash. It's on, are core sectors being usurped by software and the IT industry?
In India has grown because of IT industry and this, as I said, Tesla, Apple, they are manufacturing companies and they are nowhere, you cannot separate things anymore. You cannot have this game changer anymore. So that it should be traveling together. Anything, it's good for human values. As Shekarana said, I take his words, teaching ethics, moral is more important in whether it is IT industry or core industry. The emotional thinking, emotional, the corona has affected many people. How many of them have stepped forward and helped people? That is what it's more important. It has to make things better. It should come with childhood learning. You cannot teach this. Don't blame us. We will take all the blame, but we will never give a solution. So this cannot be taught in a classroom. This cannot be given as a syllabus. It cannot be packed in. It should come in a family situation. Only a parent can make it right in the younger age. So any industry, no industry can surpass any industry. No industry can grow better than other industry. If you are good at your work, you will definitely make, as you said, Google. Yes, Google is giving you all opportunities which is available, but how many of them are really making effective use of it? So we have to thank the FutureSkill, which has made us to curate things, which has given the content. We are giving the same content which is there in YouTube. We are not making any content creation. We are only organizing and we are only being a facilitator. That is how a institution can be. We will give you the path to travel. Traveling is your duty. We cannot travel with you all the time. That is not going to happen. If you expect that to happen, it is never going to do. It is not possible. So we will give you all the opportunities which is available for you. Making use of that opportunity in an effective way, it is there. whether you are an employer or an employee or a student or a teacher, you can play your role. As a Shakespeare said, the world is a stage. You will be playing a role. Whether you are playing it in the right way or not, that is what it is more important. No one will repeatedly come and say what you have to do. You have to understand what is your duty. You have to make that effort. I'm very sure that India is going to be a superpower in future. 2020, what Kalam sir said, we didn't do that in an effective way. So 2020 has been taken away from us. That's how I see it. So let us make 2030 as a target.
Well,
So we,
let's just say that 2020 actually gave us the time to accelerate our transformation. So it wasn't a total loss. I think we've accelerated on this digital journey. It's God, now every child understands this. So hopefully this will be a trigger to lift us
so,
forward, upward and onward.
it made us to self-realize who we are.
Yes,
What is
yes,
our potential?
yes.
So we had a potential of making great changes in this 1 year time. Let us.
And we can reach the globe now through this screen that is in front of us.
It's a global village, so
Yes.
let us not restrict ourselves with India and the state. So let us go ahead, make better for future for all human beings. Wish you all the best.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we're bang on time now. Thank you all for a wonderful session, and particularly from Dr. Sai Prakash, Dr. Sekar, and Vaishali. All of you mentioned how you're actually using FutureSkills, and I think that's very gratifying to us at NASSCOM, because our intent is that this ecosystem should expand further and further, whether you use the platform, whether you don't, but as long as you're talking about it, you're leveraging it, you're building India, I think we're doing a great job together. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much to all the panelists for joining us at India Science Festival. It was an absolute pleasure. And a special thank you to Kirti, Seth, ma'am. Thank you so much. We couldn't have asked for a better moderator at this session. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, at India Science Festival, we have constantly talked about how interdisciplinary our discussions are going to be. And in our attempts at making science more accessible to everybody, this festival cannot be complete without actually discussing a few issues that exist in the field of science and technology. And, we really want to shed light on certain problems that we have been facing in the field of science and technology for multiple years now. And due to the same reason, we really are looking at building a festival that is representative and inclusive in all aspects. And with the same goal in mind, I would like to invite the panelists for our next session, titled Bias in STEM, the Signs Have a Single Shade. Could I please request Dr. Booker, Dr. Rajaraman, Dr. Vishweshariah, Dr. Singh, and Dr. Yengde to please turn on their videos and audio. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us at this panel discussion. It's an absolute pleasure to host all of you on our platform. Might I just say that this discussion is a very, very important one for everybody. And it's just really important that all our audience members are receptive to it. And could I please request all our audience members to be a little extra sensitive in their understanding of this discussion. I would like to take just a minute to introduce all our fabulous panel members. We have Dr. Ansley Booker, who's the Director of Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives at the Mercer University. She will be expressing her views on colorism in STEM. We have with us Dr. Satendra Singh, who's the Associate Professor of Physiology and the co-founder of Health Humanities Group at the University College of Medical Sciences, Delhi. He will be shedding light on the representation of the disabled. We have Dr. Sandhya Vishweshariah, the Professor of the Department of Molecular Reproduction and Development and Genetics at IISc, and she will be talking about the gender bias in STEM. We have Dr. Bittu Rajaraman, who's the head of the Department of Psychology and Associate Professor of Biology and Psychology at Ashoka University. who will be talking about trans and queer representation in STEM. And this session will be moderated by Dr. Suraj Yengde, who's a senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School and author of the bestseller book Caste Matters. He is a human rights attorney and has actively expressed his views on anti-caste and anti-racism. So without any further ado, may I please request Dr. Yengde to take this discussion ahead. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everybody. It's a delight and pleasure to be moderating this panel. The India Science Fest folks reached out to me 2 days ago to find out if I could moderate. And I immediately jumped. My office was freaking out because there's a back forth. As you know, calendar these days are quite booked. But part of the reason why I accepted this was to, of course, listen to the illustrious panelists and their views on bias, but also with the hope to add some dimensions that I hopefully will bring and learn from you all. So I'm glad for the Science Fest for organizing this, and to all the panelists, welcome to you. And the people who are attending from afar, do send your questions. Some of those will be taken towards the end. There are a few questions on the table for the panel, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out and I will solicit your responses on them. So what we'll do is we'll have much of an interactive conversation. So when I think about bias, one of the books that I read was Bias. It was by Jennifer, who is a social psychologist at Stanford. And her book Bias was basically premised on two base core arguments. One was, you are biased not because you want to be biased always. You might have right intentions, but yet bias kicks in. So what is bias? And so Jennifer argues it is an implicit bias, something that, has been part of your culture, your tradition, how you think about doing things. And the second important differentiation Jennifer marks in the book of Biases as to how the ingrained stereotypes, I'm using her word, contribute to producing a bias of some sort. Today we have a panelist who will bring this interesting dynamics to us. So why don't we begin with the people who are looking at my screen. First, Professor Sandhya, then Satendra, Bittu, and then we'll go to Ansley. Could you maybe help us thinking about what is bias? And 2, does bias exist in STEM?
Thank you very much, Suraj, for requesting me to speak. I was specifically asked to speak about bias in STEM. And I think I will restrict my comments to that because the other panelists are going to talk about other aspects of bias. Now, you used the word stereotypes a minute ago, and I think that is actually the whole problem as far as STEM is concerned. There are stereotypes that lead people to treat men and women differently. In many ways, they hold them to different standards, and this perpetuates gender bias in society as a whole. Now, if there is gender bias in society, naturally it's going to extend into any kind of professional activity that you pursue, and that would be, for example, in STEM. What are the major issues as far as STEM is concerned? You need role models in whatever profession you're in. You need role models who you believe are excelling, who you believe are examples of achievement in whatever way you look at it. And what has happened in STEM is that there is a great paucity of women in senior positions. And I'm sure my other panelists will talk about people of color being poorly represented in senior positions, whether it's in industry, whether it's in university. And so therefore, with the absence of these role models, young people entering a profession begin to believe that perhaps women are not as good scientists as their male colleagues. Maybe women aren't as competent, and that's the reason why they're not directors of institutions, etc. Now, these implicit biases have become ingrained in many areas, and especially in universities. If you think about industry, you believe that women aren't as good at engineering or physics or mathematics. Women have different qualities which make them more suited perhaps to different professions. Now, while I was preparing for this discussion, I read an article that appeared in PNAS last year. And what they did was they reviewed the productivity of men and women scientists professionally. Now, scientists are measured by their ability to publish papers. I mean, that's a measure of scientific productivity. And what they found was that actually men and women produce the same number of papers over a career span. But then what's the problem? The problem is that women tend to drop out much earlier. And this is for family reasons, children commitments. And so therefore, the whole career span is sometimes much shorter for women. So overall, at the end of 20 or 30 years of research, you have men who have become apparently more productive, but there is no reason for that to be the case if you just look at the statistics. Now, this also suggests that the ability of women to communicate about their science, to get up on stage and speak about what they're capable of, these women get stereotyped as bossy, too outspoken, too emotional in the way they present things. And to be honest with you, I think I've also been a victim of some of those biases that have come through, because I do speak very openly about my concerns about the lack of women representation in science. Now, what that means is that it becomes difficult then for women to speak openly about these things, because they're always afraid in a way that they're being perceived as too domineering, as too out there. And that is not what a woman is supposed to be. She is supposed to have other qualities which are supposed to make her more compassionate, more understanding, more sympathetic. And these are considered attributes that are not what you would expect in a scientist who has to be completely ruthless and sticks to facts. Now, Indian science, if I can come back and finally in the last few minutes talk about Indian science, we suffer greatly from a lack of women voices and representations in decision-making bodies in this country. Now, this is purely because women have really not taken on science as a career, except in the last perhaps 2 decades or so. Though I do also believe there is something like a glass ceiling. That is, even though if women progress and move up the ladder, there is something that prevents them from becoming leaders of institutions in India. For example, there is no woman director of any leading academic institution in India so far, whether it's the IITs, whether it's the IIScs. Now, that's glaring, because are we saying that women aren't competent enough to become directors? Do we not wish to perceive or hear their opinions when it comes to decision-making aspects as far as Indian science and technology is concerned? What is the way to overcome this, if at all there is a problem? If you ask women in general, what is it that they really need to be able to pursue productive careers? They'd like flexibility in their working hours. They need to take care of children. Whether you like it or not, the burden of childcare and home care still rests with women all over the world. And I'm not speaking just about India right now. So if there was greater flexibility, if there was greater understanding from the management and organizations to allow women to be, take time off if their children are not well, without assuming that they're slacking. And that's, I think, the biggest problem, that if a woman takes off because her child is sick, she's considered less committed to her profession than a man. So there are many, many issues with respect to bias in STEM, but they really come from societal implications about what a woman can and cannot do. And this is told to daughters, this is told to young children as they begin to pursue a career. And therefore, it's going to take a long time for us to be able to bring in some kind of measure of equality in STEM professions all over the world. I don't just speak for India here. Thank you.
Dr. Satendra Singh, you can go next with the same question.
Thank you, Suraj. Yeah, and thank you for that question. I would like to add on what Dr. Sandhya mentioned, the presence of role models. So I would specifically talk about, since I'm a doctor with a disability, I would specifically restrict myself to the field of disability. Where are the health professionals with disabilities? How many of these health professionals with disabilities we have seen? And the answer to that question is, if we consider the example of India, the main root cause is that many times there are systemic barriers. Now there are physical barriers. Even hospitals, which should have been the first place to be accessible, these are not accessible to people with disabilities, which include both patients as well as providers with disabilities. Not all people with disabilities are patients. Many of them wear stethoscopes. And when I was in my medical school, that time, there were so many microaggressions which were happening around me, and I was not aware what is happening to me because the medical school was not accessible. I used to come late because there were absence of, there were no elevators. And many times because of that, I tended to develop that internalized ableism, that I am the part of the problem. And that was substantiated to a very large extent by our curriculum, because our curriculum talks about medical model of disability. They say if there is a person with disability, we need to fix them without knowing that they can become, health professionals or doctors with disabilities. So I grew up in that particular environment, that curriculum. And when I came back to India, or came back to Delhi for a faculty positions, I joined as a faculty. But when I applied for the same post in another health services, Ministry of Health post, they said that you are not suitable to be teaching in a medical school. And it took me 4 years to change that decision. After 4 years of my struggle, finally the Ministry of Health, they opened around 1700 posts for faculty with disabilities. So these posts were till now locked only because of the biases that we are not competent enough. Nobody questioned my competence when I was in medical school. Nobody questioned my competence when I completed my specialty. But the Ministry of Health, few people without having a lived experience of disability, they make those policies. And this is the most difficult part, because these are the most difficult barriers to break. These are the attitudinal barriers. If I give you an example, when India was one of the major country who ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, the biggest human right instrument of the 21st century. And based on that, it was legally mandated on us to change all our existing laws. And based on that, we framed our Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act in 2016. When this was a bill and it was being discussed in the parliament, it was sent to a committee of group of ministers. So there were 5 cabinet ministers, and one cabinet minister said, "Why are you giving jobs to people with mental illnesses? How can people with schizophrenia can work?" And that opened a Pandora's box, because so many people on Twitter, they use the hashtag #WeCanWork, and they share their photographs with the placards that mental illness is no bar. Dr. John Nash, he had schizophrenia and he won Nobel Prize in mathematics. So where is the reason to question the competence? So I think these are the problems, that microaggressions, they can build upon stereotypes. They can lead to discriminations, both overt, based on overt as well as unconscious biases, and we need to identify them. But the difficult part is that when they ingrain themselves into policy making decisions, then it becomes really difficult to tackle these situations. And that's where the lived experiences of people from the marginalized communities come in, and which should be given due preferences.
That's right. Thank you. That's terrific. And thank you for sharing your anecdote. More power to your struggle. Next, we'll go with Dr. Rajaraman.
Thank you, Suraj. Thank you to all of you for giving me a chance to talk about this. It marks also an important, stage in the evolution of this discourse, where for years we've been pushing around questions of gender in STEM, and I think especially so many women scientists in this country have been pushing, and we see still how little things have moved. But there are two sort of major things that I want to address. I'm glad that many of the points that I might have wanted to say around these have already been spoken about. But I'd like to say two things. One is that, as a trans person in science, one of the difficulties has always been to make the conversation about gender not necessarily automatically become a conversation about only women, in that there are gender minorities in the sciences and everywhere. Of course, now that we've broadened up the possibility of having trans-affirming spaces in the sciences, there are 40, 50 odd trans kids in science who've reached out to me. And it's just been, I didn't even expect such numbers. And, there's only a couple of us who trans academics in the sciences. And so, of course, we hope that some of these things will change. And to be trans-affirming, institutions need to also do particular things and commit to particular things. So all of you at various institutions, for example, a trans kid in IISc reached out to me recently. There are trans students in every institution who are worried about being openly trans and about just having trans-affirming resources. We'll be putting out a document soon suggesting to all of you some of the measures that you can implement in your institutions that can make them trans-friendly. But certainly, if one doesn't have very basic things like bathrooms that are gender-affirming or that are gender-neutral, if one doesn't have housing spaces that affirm the genders of students, if students aren't supported in our transitions, for me, until this stage, it's been very difficult. My PhD degree is from Harvard, where, the question of my sort of getting the name on my PhD degree changed while I'm here in India is sort of quite a difficult one now. And then the question of how one can then publish or exist in the name. So, I live as Bittu, people see me in this way, and yet a lot of my documents continue to have a conflicting name. Now, the thing is, my current employer is good with this, and so I'm functional as an academic. But I know that in several places where I've tried to apply to jobs, there are automatic disqualifications, assuming fraudulence, for people who have two different names on the documents which we submit. So, some of these basic sort of people aren't even able to get a foot in the door, given the fact that these basic sort of modifications to the system don't exist. And I think we also have the movement around disability to thank for really putting front and center this question of how, in the absence of making such accommodations, institutions are effectively exclusive. And it's not as if, trans people or people with, disabilities or really any marginalized community who has been marginalized by society cannot sort of do science or really do anything else. But the ways in which structures contribute to that systematic marginalization, those need to be changed so that one doesn't see underrepresentation. The second thing that I want to say is that if you look at the two people who are, trans folks in the sciences, both, including myself, are from a Brahmin background, right? And this, I think, really brings out to me, even in most of the gender in science discussions or the women in science discussions, right? The fact that across academia, one sees an incredible sort of dominance of Savarna and Brahmin communities, such that the experiences of those facing multiple marginalizations is just completely out of the question. And there is also a specific problem, which is that gender is an international discourse. And so people who scramble to look progressive in India will at least want to have gender in some way kind of be visible, right? But caste is the unexamined kind of, a system in India, which people aren't even willing to put under scrutiny, let alone anything else. And I think the resurgence in, and really the surprising ways for me as an academic based in India also, to see international sort of scientific societies start to question the racism in their own practices, especially in the wake of the last year and the ways in which the Black Lives Matter movement has sort of really prompted some kinds of introspections that I never thought would even happen in the context of the US around race, around colonialism and so on. Somehow, you'll find academics in India who are comfortably kind of tweeting their support for that simply without examining a caste equivalently in the context of India. And that's something we have to examine, not, for two reasons. One is that if you are even taking up the discourse of women or trans persons in science, the question is which women and which trans persons, right? The second is that, these aren't inclusion of like, it's not as if, you should include women, you should include trans persons, you should include Dalit, Bahujan and Adivasi persons because we should be sweet and we should be nice and we should, be inclusive. It's not just that. It's that science is suffering also, right? Science suffers, I think, especially in India, from the really tiny fraction of people who get to do it, who are largely homogenous, have very similar ideas, and so we're restraining the kinds of, and we're constraining. Certainly, as a country fighting a colonial legacy, we need to be really providing a space where all of the people with an interest in science and an aptitude for science get that space to sort of contribute their ideas, and a whole host of original ideas. Colonialism is bad for science also because of the fact that, again, this, globally you have this restricted sense of who's producing science, and ideas get restricted by that. And, we see that, we've seen all of the interesting ways, and I work in sort of neuroscience and behavior, and certainly when you're studying neuroscience and behavior, who you're studying and who's doing the studying makes a huge difference to what you find. So the facts of 100 years ago are that men outperform women in testing paradigms, and that those facts change today because movements make not just universities, but the world a more equal place around gender. And then you find the facts around testing that emerge from human behavior to change as well. And that's not just something that's sort of good for inclusion in general, which is a good enough reason to do all of this, but it also improves the quality of the science that has emerged, right? I'm hoping also that that all of this rescues a lot of what is problematic or repetitive or boring about Indian science. And I'll just, conclude this part by saying that, of course, there's a lot more that one can say, but certainly bias exists. If there's any amount of sort of denial around discrimination towards women, discrimination towards trans people, and certainly about the casteism in Indian science and the ableism in Indian science, right? Because the discourse in Indian science is still, you have to prove that you are capable. You have to prove, this or that. And that is fundamentally centered on a certain kind of ableist logic. So certainly such bias exists. I mean, I'm not going into anecdotal, stories about all of the kinds of comments I've heard in the scientific spaces that I've been in that incorporate all of these systemic aggressions, I would say, and certainly microaggressions as well. But I will just conclude by saying, in every such discussion, we have to remember the words of Rohit Vemula, who was a student at the University of Hyderabad and a friend who had, his letter talks about the kinds of casteism and really it's a sort of broader philosophical, pronouncement on the state of the world. But we have to remember that he is an example of somebody who was told by scientists at the University of Hyderabad that, he was exposed to these kinds of casteist ideas like this person cannot do science, that person cannot do science. And, I know all of you have heard people say this person cannot do science, that person cannot do science. And it's nonsense. We all know that at some level it's nonsense. Everybody can do science. That's the point of science, is to sort of blast open this question of ability itself. And, if a teacher says X cannot do science, Y cannot do science, they're saying something about their problematic aspects of their own, pedagogy rather than anything else. Rohit went on to start working on casteism in the sciences, on the social science of casteism in the sciences. And so I'm hoping that we can examine this at every lens. And, as the organizers know, I refuse to speak on any panel around even gender in the sciences, unless we are addressing caste. And I know how the organizers also tried to sort of look for scientists who could address this. And, scientists from Dalit, Bahujan and Adivasi backgrounds are under incredible pressure to not talk about their experiences of casteism, right? I mean, surviving is hard enough. So I'm hoping that we change the overall mahal so that, even the composition of this panel changes in the next time that this discussion is had. Thank you.
to the rousing appeal and call of action. Thank you, Dr. Rajaraman. And also, we hope that in your transition, you are enjoying the life as well as the support you very much deserve and the love and care and affection that is extended to you. Now let's go to Dr. Booker and get her views on bias in STEM, and of course here within her context and also broader.
Yes, good morning. Thank you so very much for that question. I will again begin by saying that I agree totally with everything that has been said thus far. As a doctor that works in diversity and inclusion and equity spaces here in the United States, particularly in the Deep South at a predominantly white institution, it's very important that we look at bias. Many of the things that I talk to my faculty, staff, and students about, and even community leaders and even companies, is particularly about implicit bias. Implicit bias referring to those attitudes and stereotypes that we have in that unconscious manner that really impact our actions and how we treat individuals and how we allow individuals into certain spaces. And so particularly as a Black woman or African-American woman in STEM, I study historically underrepresented minorities in STEM disciplines or STEAM disciplines. And most of those being Black, Hispanic, or Latinx, or then also our Indigenous persons here in the United States. And so what I found is that because of our implicit bias, they often lead to microaggressions, which I think someone has already mentioned previously. And those microaggressions also, we see micro invalidations, micro assaults on these individuals, particularly the Black and Indigenous people of color in the United States. And so one of the things that I wanted to address is how those things affect the hostile environment or the chilly STEM environment. And we've mentioned also because of this chilly environment, many individuals do not even matriculate, not only through the P through 12 or the primary school, they also do not relay that into higher education. And then of course, lesser and lesser individuals actually matriculate on to have a STEM career or even job. And again, these things are ingrained in our culture through gender norms, gender stereotypes, even their ability, because there's also what we mentioned earlier, there's inscription to intelligence. And I know when I looked at the Harvard Implicit Association test, what we see is that there is a preference for women in liberal arts and men for science. And then also with the gender career is that there's a preference for women in family and then men also in career. So a lot of times when I'm dealing with these conversations, are particularly for our historically marginalized groups in the US, I tend to try to address some of these stereotypes, microaggressions, microinvalidations, imposter syndrome, xenophobia, because again, these are really hindering particularly Black and Hispanic, and then also Indigenous persons from even entering into these careers. And oftentimes what we see here in our country, United States here, is that because of these systemic racism and these different policies and procedures that have been put in place since segregation, many of our counties and even school districts have not been able to recover successfully, especially in some of our rural areas and compared to our urban areas. And then also looking at the contrast between our predominantly white institutions and our historically Black colleges and universities and what we're looking at. I will say that with research, we've seen that some of our historically Black colleges and universities have produced the greatest number of engineers in our country. And so as a D&I professional, when I do these things, I call institutions, I call companies to the corporate to kind of do a self-assessment, stating that we're all biased into some form, but what can we do to mitigate those bias? Of course, as a D&I professional, I'm looking at trainings about sexism, racism, LGBTQ issues, safe space training for those individuals, trainings that allow for the removal of policies and procedures that prevent discrimination, harassment for individuals with different religious practices, also for those that have different abilities. And what I also want to recommend to the institutions is that we look at hiring even more, particularly Black and Indigenous persons of color to their faculty and staff, because again, we know that visibility matters, mentorship matters, being an institution, being able to provide additional resources and funding, making sure that those students are academically prepared, not only at the higher education level, but at this P through 12 level, because again, a greater number of our students, particularly women, drop out in early elementary, high school, and middle school because they don't have that science identity, or they haven't established that science identity. And there's several things that contribute to that science identity, whether it's environment, whether it's the microaggressions, whether it's a lack of visibility of faculty and staff that actually look like you. Again, we have a great number of students that actually don't even see individuals, particularly myself, Black women of color, as scientists. So again, there was this campaign of what a doctor looks like, what does a scientist look like, what does an engineer look like? Because again, if we have this bias and it's again perpetuated by these cultural norms and these stereotypes, these people can never actually see, particularly women of color, will never actually see themselves in these professions, working even in academia. So I definitely want to make sure that we address some of those things. And then also looking at issues with the digital divide, lack of resources, lack of books, lack of internships and resources and opportunities. I know that a great number of programs, particularly in our schools in the US, are becoming STEAM or STEM certified to make sure that there's a pipeline for these students to actually enter into higher education, making sure that they are academically prepared, that they're having sound teaching and advanced courses, mathematics, calculus, because oftentimes we see that because of where these schools are located, whether they're in urban areas, urban cities, or even in rural districts, they're not getting the same amount of access to technology and resources that some of their counterparts are. So again, to address some of those issues and concerns, I think we have to look again about the historical nature of how our institutions were developed, and also address some of the issues between systemic racism that have led to divides in education and also access greatly for African-American women or Black individuals, Hispanic or Latinx individuals, and those indigenous persons is what my research really focuses on. But again, like many of the panelists have said, we still also need to look at opening spaces and dialogue to address policies and procedures, not only in our companies, but also in our institutions that address discriminations for ableism, sexism, and then also even with LGBTQ plus students, because a great number of our students are students of color. They do have some disabilities. Some of our students do have some disabilities, including our faculty, staff, and students. So we're definitely addressing some of those issues and concerns to try to make our institution a place for inclusive excellence.
Thank you, Dr. Booker. I think you, in effect, also summarized some of the previous aforementioned comments. I think this really opens up, an interesting Pandora's box for, let's say, the South Asian, in this case, Indian science practicing audience or science appreciating audience, in the sense that I want to go to, much of your points, Dr. Booker, could be, of course, applied, and so with Dr. Sandhya's, Dr. Singh, and Dr. Rajaraman's kind of very much almost on the same page, trying to appeal for more representation, appeal for more recognition of their labor and their service. I want to go to Dr. Vishweshariah. In your comments, you complimented about the women researchers whose equally profound input remains unrecognized, and in a way, you also went to talk about people of color. Somehow, do you think caste missed out from your prism? Is that a representation of how feminist science practicing can correlate to their partners across the aisle, but not self-examine?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I really enjoyed listening to the other three speakers, because what they brought out was the kind of marginalization that perhaps, it doesn't come into my sphere of thinking readily. I mean, I'm aware of all of these issues, but it suddenly struck me that, what we're talking about on a larger scale is that almost 50% of the world's population is marginalized in some way or another. And that represents women. And within that, you have some of the problems that we heard faced by some of our other speakers. And of the other 50%, you have the same sorts of problems experienced by that 50% as well. So I don't know really what the solution is, but I do see that the solution can lie in science in a way. For example, science is built on the premise that you have an open mind and that you're ready to look at evidence in order to be able to reach conclusions. Now, because of that, you should be open to thinking about people for what they are without having biases or any aspects of assuming that they're a certain way because they look a certain way or they talk a certain way. And I think a little bit more science in our lives would allow many of these biases to go away. For example, if you're aware of the facts scientifically, and I mentioned a publication saying that women publish as much as men, you may then stop believing that women are less good at science or technology or engineering. Now, there is an organization that started up in India, which is called Bias Watch. And what this little community of people do is to look at representation of women, for example, in scientific meetings. Now, in biology, and I'm a biologist, 50% or more of our students are women. When you move into the assistant professor level, that number comes down to about 15%. When you move to the professorial level, it decreases to as little as 5%. Now, the question is, at some way, somehow these girls who come up to do a PhD in biology don't make it to the top. Now, one of the reasons that Bias Watch attributes this to is that women are not given the opportunity to talk about their science in scientific meetings. And so what this group of people do is actually call out meetings where you have manels who decide the speakers. And they pick up meetings where only men are speaking. So even in biology, you will find that there are a good number of meetings held every year in India where there isn't a single woman speaker. Now, do you want to attribute this to bias of the organizers? Or in many cases, I felt that men just don't see women. They don't see them. And I've sat in committees where we've looked for speakers. And it's only because I am there that I emphasize, where are the women? Why aren't we finding women speakers? So there are so many ways at which, we have this removal of certain sections of society, not stated obviously. And I would certainly think caste is definitely one of those. Now, the government may make extra efforts to ensure that we get good representation of castes in our students, but it's not just up to us selecting scheduled caste or scheduled tribe students. Those students have to have come all the way from school upwards to even consider doing a PhD. So the biases are really beginning at school level, and we only see the top. And there's very little we can do to change things at the top when the base is so weak and so fragile.
Thank you. I think that could apply also in that case. Same logic could apply to women non-representation as well.
Absolutely.
In the sense that it doesn't. I would just like to pick on Dr. Rajaraman. You heard Dr. Sandhya's interventions on this and how kind of female representation is the charter of much of this, marginalizations. How would you respond to someone who makes this argument, which is true? Data says all of that. Do you think we can think through that experiences, or you think we can contradict that and there is something else that we need to focus on?
I think that we don't need to certainly play hierarchy Olympics. Everyone is facing the majority of people in our country are working class. The majority of people in our country are Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi. And half of the country is there are women. In fact, gender minorities might, with trans representation, cross 50%, right? In terms of oppressed genders presence in the community. As a group that has been called a sort of micro minority in court judgments, right? The LGBT community also, we know that the numbers in these representations are going to change as the world changes. But being a small, the size of the majority or the minority does not, affect the quality of discrimination that is faced. And these are qualitatively different experiences. And the qualitative experience of being a woman or being trans is extremely class and caste specific also, right? And vice versa, right? The experience of being of experiencing caste itself is very gendered in terms of how that plays out. And so I would just say, in fact, when when Sandhya was also talking about sort of the framework of science, right? That you look at facts, and that's potentially a space where some of this can be combated. I couldn't agree more. I completely agree with that. And this is also one of the reasons that I think addressing Brahmanism is important for Indian science, because Brahmanism is one of the major factors that gets in the way of being scientific, right? Science education in this country suffers from being Brahmanized. So it's taught in the way that Brahmins do their chants. No, so in school you're taught to memorize things, and the whole framework of education comes from this very Brahminical idea of commit things to memory and then spit them back out. When students ask questions, as Rohit did, or as so many students do, they're often told not to ask questions. And science begins by asking questions. So I think that, it's about constituencies, but it's also about, the health of the academic effort of science. I think that many of these aspects of bias are also getting in the way of good science being done. As Dr. Booker said, I was remiss in even focusing my claims on intervention in the university space, because everything begins at school, certainly. And there's a limit to how much one can, as I said, even the world and political change in the world changes, especially when we work on humans, the sort of facts of human life. And so there is a limit to what we can do in changing institutions after there have been, after students have faced 18 to 20 years of injustice. And so at some level, scientists will also have to be political. They will have to be politically active in changing and in combating systemic casteism, systemic classism, and so many other things. Urban location, right, makes a huge difference. Regional location makes a huge difference. If you're in an area like Kashmir that the government has cut off internet from, then there's just no question of, none of us Kashmiri students are able to access online classes, right? You're moving online. Who has digital tools? Who has access to digital tools? These are the kinds of things that we must continue to introspect on. And, these are always faced intersectionally. So very often, let's just take gender and caste as examples. Discourse on gender tends to leave out caste, and discourse on caste tends to leave out gender. And the intersectional approach which we need, which actually there are several Dalit feminists who have made this critique. But are we seeing that within STEM? The problem is that both of these intersectionally impact Dalit women, Adivasi women, Bahujan women in science. And then that makes representation of intersectional people who experience intersectional marginalization even lower. So, we have to think intersectionally about, even when we're talking about single issues. Suppose, someone calls me to talk about trans issues and doesn't want me to talk about everything else. I can't address trans issues without addressing intersectionality with all of these other things, because it affects my experience. I've sometimes met people and thought, array, this person is very trans-friendly. And then other members of the trans community who are from more marginalized socioeconomic backgrounds, and I say, this person is acting in front of you because they think, this is somebody with the privilege to call me out on it. I'm not somebody like that. And so in front of me, their transphobia comes out. So, there is no such thing as uniform experience across these injustices, across these socioeconomic barriers that have been created by the system, and that we perpetuate and continue to benefit from when we are ourselves not facing particular aspects of marginalization.
Thank you. Very quick, Dr. Singh, I want you to also have your time, but more importantly, as you heard these conversations, and a disability issue is something that doesn't even feature. I did a India for Diversity a kind of tour 2 years ago, educating India, mostly education institutions. And my focus was caste, sexuality, disability, and religion. And of course, the regional dynamics come in. It was surprising to me that people didn't even know anything about disability. In the same, when I say anything, I mean to say the experiences, not the experiences, but they didn't have a perception of looking at disability as a societal issue. They had a very patronizing approach to that. and within this dynamics within STEM, I mean, if you have to think about, is there a way that we can perhaps quantify this? Can we do that?
Yeah, of course, and we are still considered in that patronizing way because the leaders of our political scenario, they give us those labels that we are people with divine abilities. It is still happening. And the WHO says in the World Report on Disability that 1 in 7 experience some type of disability. Now that makes us, we, the people with disability, as the world's largest minority. But look at the literature. The literature by able-bodied researchers says that the quality of life of disabled people is very poor. On contrast, look at the studies published by researchers with disabilities, which disagree with them. And that's also true because 60% of 65% of PWDs, disabled people, live in the global south. And even in that, I mean, 75% of those live in the rural areas in India. Still, there are many people with disabilities who go into the higher educations. But if you look at the data, last year we published in the Lancet this study, which was a global commitment to inclusion in disability in higher professional educations. And we published data that in the number of medical students with disabilities in UK is 10%, in US it is 4.6% of the total populations. In contrast, we have no data in India, Australia, and Canada. And if you look at more data, there was a study last year in PLOS 1 by Dr. Lisa Meeks from University of Michigan and Dr. Swana from John Hopkins. And this, it was titled A Decade of Decline. And they studied the NIH grant recipients who were principal investigators having a disability. Their number decreased drastically from 1.9% in 2008 to 1.2% in 2018. Another study by the same authors with the name The Unexamined Diversity examined that one of the largest undergraduate medical education institutions in the US, though they do have some policies on disability on paper, but many of these were not in sync with the standard guidelines. They were not in sync with the AAMC guidelines. And in India, absolutely, we do not have any policy as such, though in the law, the new disability law, it does mandate that every institution, publicly funded or private, they must have an equal opportunity policies. So if you ask about the data, non-existent data. The census, Indian census says we are 2.2%. The WHO says there are 15% people of disability in India, whereas the Telangana study, where they use the Washington set of questionnaires, the standard norm by UN, they found the prevalence of disability in India to be 12%, a 6-time increase.
And this kind of, I was looking at All India Higher Education Survey 2 years ago, and the faculty All India representation of disabled was 0.3%. So it's
even the last year's All India Higher Education Survey, I saw that whole survey, and they were quoting disabilities from the repealed 1995 Act. There were only 7 types of disabilities. Now we have 21 specified type of disabilities. So they're not even measuring the data. So no wonder you are getting that drastically reduced numbers.
That's Dr. Booker, you have heard these 3 perspectives from India, and I just would like to pick your brains on. So when you talk about women issue, when you talk about disabled issue, when you talk about LGBTIQ issues, what is a fundamental common theme that runs in American experience? What is that could perhaps unite this disparate struggles, and what has been your experience in dealing with DEI movement in your workplace?
Well, I would say that the common theme, and I think someone has already mentioned it, is that historically these populations have been marginalized. So I think first we have to actually speak truth to that and use the data to support that, whether that's qualitative data or quantitative data. Oftentimes this data is pushed to the side to promote a personal agenda, right, for a particular college, university, institution, or either company or practice. So I think we actually have to have accountability. We often saw this summer with the Black Lives Matter movement and some other movements of social injustice here in the United States and around the world protesting racism. We have to take that and take it into accountability and say these things actually exist. These things happen not only in our classrooms, but also in our communities. And these are the persons that are impacted the most. And actually take some real accountability and look at ways that we can actually unify versus divide these individuals and look at how diversity of all aspects, race, gender, sex, ability, religion, etc., undocumented status, really help to unify our country and strengthen our country, universities and communities, again, for the better. And look at how diversity and inclusiveness really, really makes for a better work environment, better community, and even better institution of higher learning. So one of the things that we use in our university is this motto about we're going to change the world. We want to be global citizens. So I think taking that step of unity and practicing solidarity and reconciliation and addressing some of these problems, these systemic problems through justice and equity based practices and policies, such as being intentional about your hiring, promotion, and tenuring of people of color. I think is one of the things that we can use to address these issues. Also being intentional about removing glass ceilings, helping to lower the gender pay gap in science, in STEM and other areas in our community to make sure that everyone has an economic opportunity to uplift their community, particularly those that are marginalized. I think being intentional about recruiting of faculty, staff, and students to these underrepresented disciplines. I think it's very important using qualitative and quantitative data to support these notions. I know oftentimes from my perspective, having women of color come and speak about their experiences in STEM disciplines is very eye-opening and very impactful, because now we're putting a face to some of the stories that we heard about marginalizations, microaggressions, xenophobia, and calling these things out as what they are. If they are supremacy attitudes, if they are a matter of decolonizing an institution or an organization or even a company, these things are very important to lend a voice, to give a voice to the voiceless, to speak up. If people are being marginalized, even in staff meetings, you overlook this woman or this person of color because they're a woman and they were a person of color, then you as an ally lend your voice to help amplify their voice, if that makes sense. A lot of that goes into my DE&I work that we talk about equity and justice and what does that look like. Again, taking back someone's identity. Identity is a big part of this conversation. Oftentimes in my research, I talk about a science identity, making sure there's a connection between individuals that are considered to be quote unquote marginalized, looking at the language in which we use to describe them. We say minority versus majority. Sometimes those things can further marginalize the population. Looking at terms and words, someone mentioned earlier about making sure there's safe spaces on campuses, like even restrooms. Most oftentimes people that are heteronormative go to the restroom and they feel completely fine. But if someone feels discriminated against or maybe even be harassed in the restrooms, then we need to change our policies and practices on campus to allow for gender neutral or gender inclusive housing. I know I just did an initiative to get more single stall restrooms on our campuses. So there's things that you have to actually look at your institution. You look at your shortcomings, your blind spaces, places in which you can improve. You can always get a DE&I assessment of your organization, your institution, or even your community, and look for gaps or holes in which you can address these things. I know the biggest things that I'm seeing, particularly being in the South, being in America, are issues with gender issues, also the economic divide, and then also racism, and actually trying to address those things. And then I guess also making sure that individuals learn as much as they can. I know if people need a quick refresher, I refer them to TED Talks, because you're using people's real life experiences to connect with other individuals. Something you can quickly watch on YouTube, understand what bias is, understand what microaggressions are. They're great ones. I list a number of books that I won't go through by great authors that talk about some of these social injustices in our country, in this narrative, and how it has infiltrated many structures in America, including healthcare, education, etc. And I bring all that together and I try to have safe spaces and courageous conversations so that we can address some of these issues, whether they are systemic or not. Also, I'm thinking about having accountability, visibility, making sure that's important, representation. I always look for ways to be inclusive, to unify versus divide. And I think, that's going to take time, but I know we don't have as much time as we think. Because I know by 2050 in the United States, 52% of our population is going to be people of color. So that's going to drastically change our education system, our healthcare system, all of these different systems that we rely on daily to keep our economy going. So I think, being intentional about these practices and policies that may sometimes limit or marginalize people even further, trying to definitely make sure that we identify those things and then remove them as much as we can actually work for a more unified effort. And I think looking at it's going to, of course, for us, I'm looking at some of my institutional practices, depending on who's in charge. Again, politics is going to come into play. Particularly, we saw that in the United States this year as well, during the more recent election. And for us, sometimes with our school districts, it's local, federal, and state, because again, that really impacts funding, with a lot of our schools having to be still virtual versus in person. So again, just addressing a lot of different issues and variables, and I guess triaging those different variables and issues that we're having, what is going to be a priority, and looking for a more 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20-year plan with addressing some of these barriers and issues, and being intentional with those policies and procedures.
I think those are catchphrases for today's conversation, in the sense that what 4 panelists have talked about, one of the things is to be willing to face truth and be equal participant in truth telling and truth listening. Indian STEM, to my understanding, is plagued by Brahminism. The overdominance of Brahmins as a minority community into the field has really thwarted the progress of society. And we can see that over historically. We have some identical numbers in IIT. I also have a data for IISc, but I will leave it for next occasion. But in IIT, 8,856 faculties are across India. 8,000. Of them, only 21 belong to the scheduled tribe Adivasis, who are, by the way, 8% of India's population. 149 belong to scheduled caste, who, by the way, are 15% of India's population. And then if you go with other backward castes, what 52%, their number is only 329. 8,856 faculties, SC, ST, OBC, total constitute close to 78%. And if you mix them, they don't even go beyond 500 or 600 in this case. So this is the catchphrase for today's, and hopefully in our own fields, what Dr. Booker talked about is people need to see each other. What Dr. Vishweshariah talked about is if there are more women role models, what we don't have is we are willing to shift the blame and not accept Socrates dies in India. And there is a certain nuance that comes out. New England Scientific Journal and Scientific American protested against Trump's policies because he was being difficult for the scientific community. In India, the science conference continues to genuflect to the Brahminical power structures who are hell-bent on Hindutva politics, non-utterance of word. There are references of aeroplanes being flown during the Vedic era, and yet science overlooks this kind of nonsense that we tell our kids. So I think it's upon us, and I hope representation becomes part of our movement, be it disability, be it sexuality politics, be it politics of color or other marginalizations, and obviously the politics of 50%, half the world being marginalized. There are much issues to be discussed, but this was a very enriching conversation. India Science Fest hopefully gets rid of the plague that it is having, and by having more representation of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes which remains, as in America, race, here it is the caste. Thank you for logging in, and all the best. Bye-bye.
Dr. Yende, before you leave the session, just on behalf of the entire team at ISF, just want to express my heartfelt gratitude to all of you for being a part of this discussion. I just want to point out that, as rightly brought out by Dr. Rajaraman, it was due to him putting his foot down and asking us to make the panel more inclusive is why we started to seek out better representation in the panel. And like he said, we have been trying for many months, but we couldn't get people to speak on the panel. And like he said, there's so much pressure on so many different marginalized people working in STEM. And it's been a solid learning for all of us to make this a practice for the future, to ensure that there is better representation and better inclusivity in all our discussions. And with that, a very, very big thank you to all of us for such an enriching discussion, and we can only hope to host more conferences like this. Dr. Yende, thank you for stepping in at the last moment. Couldn't have asked for a better moderator. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Booker, Dr. Singh. Thank you, Dr. Rajaraman, Dr. Vishweshariah. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
pleasure to hear from all of our co-panelists and our moderator. Thank you.
Absolutely. Got to know a lot of very smart people.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. All right, we're all set and super excited for the next session. And without any further ado, I'm just going to invite our interviewer for the next session, Abhimanyu, to take the session ahead. Over to you.
Thank you, Shruti. That was a wonderful session that you moderated and conducted. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome one and all to the last session of ISMO 2021. Now, before we even begin, before I even introduce myself or our esteemed guest, I want everybody in the audience who is present here to just focus your attention on the images that are being displayed on your screen right now. Formation of the universe, nebulae, space gas, brightest stars, formation of the solar system, the dynamic sun. There's a very nice diagram of the sun, white dwarfs, red giants. We have quasars, the end of everything. You must be wondering whose notes these are. They sure don't look the part of any homework because this stuff is not taught in any curriculum that I know of. Well, to answer your question, these notes were made by Abir. Who is Abir? Abir is an 11-year-old kid who has been taking part in almost all of the sessions and games that we have been conducting in the ISMO 2021. So a couple of days ago, Abir's mother, she reached out to us over one of our social media channels. And basically she wanted to thank us for organizing this month-long fest in which her son could take part and express his scientific creativity, his acumen, everything. She was very excited. So while we were having that conversation, she basically told us a story about Abir, an incident from his life. Abir comes from a small town. So what happened was that his school, which is a small town school, they recently opened up a library. And on his first day in the library, Abir, he races past all the fiction and other sections and goes straight to the science section. There he finds a book on space that was very old, almost battered, but inside it had these wonderful illustrations of basically the universe, our solar system, the stars and everything, and basically told a very coherent story of the origin of our universe and the journey we had to take from that point through the evolution of stars, through the formation of solar system and everything in between and beyond. So Abir checked out that book from library, he got it home, and when his mother returned in the evening, she found her kid hunched over on his study table and taking down these notes from the book verbatim. And she was quite baffled. She asked him, Abhi, what are you doing? And to that, Abhi replied, Mom, I'm scared. I have to return this book in 3 days to the library. And I'm afraid that if I don't take these notes down, I'm going to forget everything that I've read today. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to focus on that story for a bit. Abir is an 11-year-old kid. Some of the stuff that is written here is quite technical in nature, and I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have understood more than half of it. But still, he had such an enthusiasm regarding this stuff that he decided to spend his evening taking down these notes. And that enthusiasm is something that every kid in our country shares. This why did I decide to tell you this story? Because this is not just Abir's story. This is my story too. I remember when I was 11 years old, I spent hours and hours on the roof of my house, just gazing into the night sky. And there would be 1,000 questions going through my mind. How vast the universe is, the stars, where did they all come from? And what is my place in all of this? Man, I wanted to be an astronaut so bad at that time. It gives me goosebumps just to think about it. So I guess to every Abir, to every me, to every 11-year-old kid who is present in our audience today, as well as to every adult who might have gone on to do other things in their lives, but are still in touch with that 11-year-old part of themselves that is still somewhere inside them. To all of you, I give you a very warm and hearty welcome. And it is my great honor and great pleasure to introduce you to our esteemed guest here tonight, Sir Anthony England. Now, as an ex-NASA astronaut, he is one of the only handful of Homo sapiens who can actually claim that he has stepped outside this beautiful, beautiful planet of ours and went to space. Like not a lot of people can claim that. And it gives me great pleasure to like introduce him. Actually, another thing, before starting this event, preparing for this interview, I had to write a formal introduction for him. And I was like quite baffled at that time because anything I could have written here would be quite superfluous. Like this man's career, his accomplishments, I don't think that they can be summed up in like 4 or 5 sentences. And yet, for the uninitiated in the crowd, I am going to give it a shot. So, Mr. Anthony is an MIT graduate. He was selected for the space program in 1967. He was among a group of astronauts who served as backups during the Apollo mission and the Skylab programs. In 1985, he served as a mission specialist on STS-51F. That is the first time he went to space. He logged 188 hours in space at that time. England helped develop and use radars to probe the moon on Apollo 17 and glaciers in Washington and Alaska. England is currently the Dean of College of Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Michigan's Dearborn campus. So, without further ado, I'm just going to shut up right now and call Mr. England to stage. Hello, sir. Namaste. Everybody who is tuned in from India as well as abroad, like warmly welcomes you. And I would like you to say hi to our audience. Welcome, sir.
Good. Well, I'd say good morning here. It's not morning there, but greetings. It's a very much a pleasure to be here. I would like to correct one thing. I've stepped down as dean, so I'm no longer dean, but I was dean until the end of August. But that's fine.
My bad. I should have like dug up a bit more about your current career. But sir, it's such an honor to have you here. I just cannot express how excited I am to be interviewing you. And like before we begin the official interview, there's one question that I want to ask you, and this is totally from my side. Yeah. So let me paint you a picture. It is a warm summer day in July 1985, 29th of July to be precise. You are sitting there in the space shuttle and it is about to take off. And you are ready for this because, you know, you're, as an astronaut, you have to go such an intense training, both psychologically as well as physiologically, that to an extent you understand what you're getting into. But then the countdown begins, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then your shuttle takes off. You're sitting there, your heart is pounding, and as the separation between your spacecraft and Earth, the degree of separation, it increases and increases. There must have come a moment when like it would have hit you, the sheer realization with in all its beautiful glory and force, the sheer force, and you would have been like, holy shit, I am in space. Sir, I want to hear from you about that moment. Like, I wouldn't forgive myself if I didn't get to hear from you, the experience, the feelings that were going through your mind in that moment.
You know, you're as you think about it, if I thought about it again, that's what I would have been going through, just as you described. But in fact, what happens is that your training forces you to pay attention to what your job is. And it isn't until after that experience that you really have the opportunity to think back. In fact, we were so busy because we worked around the clock on that mission. And incidentally, during ascent, we lost an engine and did an abort to orbit. And in fact, we were losing indications we were losing another engine, which meant that we would have had to ditch in the Mediterranean at night if that engine had shut down. So there was the abort modes that we were going through in our minds to be sure that we were doing, you know, what's my job now? What do I do next? All those kinds of things. So it really wasn't until later on when you get to orbit and get your job done, and the other, we split into 2 crews. So one would work during one 12-hour period and then the other would work during the other 12-hour period. So when you're off duty, then you can begin to think about, well, that was a real experience, you know? And so that's more the way it was. During the active part of missions, you're thinking about, what is my job? What do I do next? And it isn't until you get away from it that you have a time to say, this is pretty spectacular. In fact, on day 3 up there, our computers overheated. And so everything we were doing was interfaced through a computer. And so they had to shut them down. And during that period, we really couldn't do any work. And so I spent two orbits. It was, I Velcroed myself inside a camera hood up against a window. So I was just looking out the window for 2 orbits. And we were in a high inclination orbit. And so you could see, and we were in fairly low orbit because of this abort mode. We'd used up a lot of fuel getting to orbit. And so you could really sense the topography of the Earth. And because we were in a high inclination orbit, we saw way into Canada, and we saw down in Antarctica. And I had worked in Antarctica, so I was very interested in seeing. So you could see the southern aurora standing at a 100-kilometer high curtain over Antarctica. And because this was early August, the Perseid showers were going on, so we could see shooting stars below us. It was pretty spectacular.
I just want to savor that for a moment, the story that you told us. But no, here's the thing. I mean, the experience that you shared with us, where that like the thing was about to fail, it must have been so scary. Like, how do you maintain your cool in such an event? Is it all training? Because like there's that human element. After all, we are all humans, and when something this critical is at stake, how do you like maintain your cool and go on about it, sorting that problem out at that time without getting overwhelmed?
I believe that it's the training that, because you just do what you have to do. You owe it to the rest of the crew to do your job, and so you're focused on that. You're not focused on, gee, if you know I mean, we understood that if that engine really was overheating, as it said, we had about 15 seconds to shut it down or it would blow up. So that was not good. But our job was not to worry about that. It was to do certain things. And so that's what you did. It wasn't until later. I had an interesting, I worked for Texaco oil exploration down in the what's called the Four Corners area of the United States. It's in the Navajo Nation in northeast Arizona for a summer. And I was driving the dynamite truck, and the thing got out of control. The brakes failed, and I was on a sort of a side of a drop off that it wasn't terribly steep, but it was steep enough the truck would have rolled. And I had, I don't know, probably 1,000 pounds of dynamite on the back of the truck. And, you know, I had to allow the truck to coast backwards down a hill and around a bend with the power off so that I didn't have power steering. So it was sort of, and while you're doing it, you're not thinking about what can happen. What you think about is, what do I have to do? And when it got stopped and it was all over, then I had time to think about that. And I actually had to get out and sit on the ground. So that's sort of the way, you know, emergencies really happen. During the emergency, you do what you have to do.
I understand. Actually, when we think about like becoming astronauts and going to space, we think about all the flashy stuff, all the glory part. But this is something that we don't have that much of an idea. Maybe if I'm a youngster reading about this stuff, but I guess that is what this is about, the part where you have to like just focus and fulfill your responsibilities, because you're out there to carry out a scientific mission, and that is like above anything and everything else. Yes. So thank you so much for relating that with us. Let's begin with a question about, okay, let's start. Let me put it this way. Actually, I've heard that your inspiration as a kid about becoming an astronaut, it came from an uncle who was like a bomber pilot during World War II. That's is how it all started for you. After that, you went on to go to MIT and then finally becoming an astronaut. Like, can you just walk us through the steps in a little detail? I mean, that journey from a starry-eyed kid to an actual astronaut and all the stages in between.
Well, a lot of it is just being at the right place at the right time. I went to a small country high school. We only had 50 people in the senior class, and it didn't have many, you know, it didn't have all the math that you really needed to go to a place like MIT and everything. But So I decided to graduate a year early after my junior year, and people were saying, well, gee, you won't get into a good college. So I bet him I could. And so just as a bet. And fortunately, MIT let me in. And back then it was right after the Sputnik kind of thing. And so it was easy to get scholarships. So I got a scholarship because I couldn't have afforded to go there. It's much harder for today's students. So anyway, in that way, I was lucky. I was always interested in working on what were the big problems. And at that time, getting into space and going to the moon was a recognized big problem. So the studies that I chose in my PhD work had to do with planetary interiors, and I published along with my professors, a couple of papers on what we expected to find on the moon, in fact. And so when it came time to an opportunity to apply to the space program, since I'd already published some stuff on the moon, I thought, gee, it'd be sure fun to go up there myself and do some of the science. And so I applied and did get in. And I think I was the youngest astronaut ever. I was 25. And they never did that again. So I must have been a poor example. But anyway, that's how I got in. But it turns out that the other side of the story, which I didn't know until later, is that the astronauts didn't want scientists. And it was the National Academy of Science that forced NASA to take scientists. So the fourth group, astronauts come in groups. So the first group are the Mercury astronauts and so forth. So the fourth group was the first group of scientists, and there were 4 astronauts in that group that stayed, and Jack Schmitt eventually got to fly to the moon. And then I was in the second group of scientist astronauts, which was the 6th group and the last group of Apollo astronauts. And it was interesting, when we first got down there to Houston on the job, there were 11 of us, and they put us in a room without windows and all of these desks lined up, and one desk at the head of it looked like the teacher was our one secretary. And Al Shepard, who was the first person in space, for the US side, was the head of the astronaut office. And so he came in and he says, well, I hope you know we didn't want you here. And if you were smart, you would leave right now. But I don't suppose you're going to do that. So we'll press on from here. So that was our introduction to the astronaut. It really wasn't that much harassment, but it was a sense that we had to prove ourselves. And so they finally sent us to Air Force Flight School. And so several of us, graduated first in our classes. And it was very important to us to prove to all of these other astronauts that we could carry our part of the load.
But you didn't get that chance straight away. I mean, it was only in 1985 that you got to go to space. And
I was of the scientists in my group, I was in the track to fly on Apollo 19. At that time, we were going to Apollo 20. And after the Apollo 13 experience, NASA became too risk averse they wanted to end Apollo much sooner. The National Academy forced them to go, the compromise was to go through Apollo 17. So I didn't get to fly to the moon, but I got to be the mission scientist for Apollo 13, which didn't land, and then Apollo 16, which did land, which was very exciting. And I was just fortunate to be part of the whole thing. So there's no bitterness involved with not being able to go to the moon. I wish I could have, but it was just a great program to be involved with and to help the crew do some really good science on Apollo 16.
Definitely. Actually, that's a bit counterintuitive too, because I would imagine that after all the success we had with the Apollo missions and when the man finally landed on moon, the public's imagination was on fire with all of that stuff. So NASA's attempts to send more manned missions to moon and to other planets, the entire space exploration thing, it should have caught on, it should have accelerated. and the actual direction that they took, it was somewhat more abstract. For example, it was more about like exploring the surface of the moon rather than sending another mission to it. Maybe it was because the entire enterprise was expensive. There might have been a lot of reasons, but
one of the reasons, it really wasn't the expense. It wasn't to save money that they did canceled 18, 19, 20. It was NASA. I mean, we're not aware today that we were already getting political pressure before the Apollo 11 landing to end the space program because it was so expensive. And we're right at the same time where the Vietnam thing was going on, the civil rights issues were going on. There were a lot of people in the country who thought going to the moon was a frivolous waste of money. So NASA was concerned if they lost a mission, and Apollo 13 scared them, if they lost a mission, human spaceflight would be shut down. And NASA felt like they needed to go on to the next project, which they decided was to be the shuttle program. And Wernher von Braun, who was the center director at Marshall, and Gilruth, which is center director at Johnson Space Center, had different views for the future. Gilruth wanted to build a reusable vehicle. Von Braun wanted to build the big dumb boosters, much like Russia did on their program. And von Braun won, and Gilruth won, and von Braun was sort of kicked upstairs and never had any more influence at NASA. So there's all of this politics that goes on in the background that NASA, particularly in those days, reminds, that story about the swan looks so graceful in the water, but you don't see how hard they're paddling underneath. And that's pretty much how NASA was.
So as a member of like general public, we never really appreciate how many intricacies, how many complexities are there to every single mission that we send. Thank you so much for telling us this story. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people in the audience have gained a completely new perspective on the entire thing. One thing I want to ask about you, okay, whether you finally went to space in the 60s or the 80s, doesn't matter. But the landing of man on moon, that must have been like a very big thing for you personally as well, a major milestone in your life. How did that affect you? I guess that is what I'm trying to ask here.
We were assigned to crews. There were 9 astronauts on each crew, 3 prime, 3 backup, and 3 support. And then, so I was on the support for Apollo 13, was the first crew that I worked on. So I really didn't have a role on Apollo 11, the landing. So I actually took vacation, and I was up in Minnesota at my in-laws' lake cottage, watching it on a black and white TV. And at the same time, I could see the moon over the lake, and it was just as exciting for me as it was for everybody else. We were just cheering him on.
Definitely. Like, I'm pretty sure like I wasn't there at that time, but from the stories that I have heard and like the books that I have read, especially by the astronauts and the people who were like more personally involved in that entire thing, it was like something of a once in a lifetime, once in a century kind of event for all of them. So I'm pretty sure that it would have been pretty exhilarating. So I want to change tracks here a bit, and I want to discuss more about your like Antarctica exploration, because to somebody who is like familiar with you as an astronaut, that comes as quite a surprise that yes, you have led expeditions and teams to expeditions basically in Antarctica as well. Please tell us a little bit more about that entire phase.
I was with the U.S. Geological Survey for 7 years between the two stints at NASA. And I like to work on significant problems, and we were beginning to understand issues of global warming, and the effects of this were most rapid in the polar areas. So an opportunity to go to Antarctica really wasn't for global warming at the time. It was strategic access to some minerals that were only available in what we call mafic intrusions. And there's Stillwater is the only one in the US like that, but it's very small. And most of them were coming from areas in Southeast Africa. but these were intruded at a time when Africa and Antarctica were together. So the idea was, well, if they're on the African side, they're probably on the Antarctic side too. And geologists had seen it, the Dufek intrusion poking through the ice, which a place, it's 1,100 miles from McMurdo. And as a geophysicist, I was asked to go down and find out what was below the ice. So we used different techniques to sound through the ice and then measure this Dufek intrusion below the ice. So that's what it was. And I spent two seasons on traverses down there. And then later on, when I was at the university here, we've spent a lot of time working in the Arctic. So I've worked in the North Slope of Alaska quite a bit, and my students have also.
Definitely. Is your interest in geophysics and this entire thing, was it something that you had from your childhood, from early on, or is it something that you developed later on in your life? What were the origins of this particular interest in geophysics? And
yeah, it's something I concluded while I was at MIT. As an undergraduate, I started out in physics. But at that time, physics was high energy physics. And I saw that physicists were spending most of their careers in concrete bunkers, banging particles together. And that didn't seem very exciting. I was interested in math. So my junior year, I switched into applied math. And there I found all of the students were playing math games every night. And I wasn't playing math games. And I said, gee, I'm not going to be able to compete here. And then I found geophysics, which combined classical physics with doing things outdoors, which I really enjoyed, and that's what I finally stayed in. I liked geophysics. Was a great thing because I could work at the computer as much as I worked, but when I got restless and needed to get out, I could go out on the North Slope of Alaska if I wanted to, and or Antarctica, and so for me it was perfect.
Definitely. That was actually quite a detour we had there. I want to come back to space for once more. Okay, we went through all those stages, 60s, 70s, 80s, but right now we have got a renewed interest in sending spaced missions, be it in terms of governmental efforts like NASA is in India, it says RO, or it might also be in terms of this new thing that we call space tourism. Where private entities, they cannot wait to send people to space and charge stuff for it. So how do you see the ethics surrounding this entire enterprise, I guess, the concept of space tourism?
Yes, I applaud it. In fact, not so much because I want to be a space tourist, but one of the things in NASA's charter was to transfer technology to the private sector. And we didn't do that soon enough. We should have been doing that all through much of the shuttle program and getting the SpaceX's and other companies competing on transportation methods, and it would have greatly lowered our cost to get to orbit and perhaps move this whole process along sooner. I don't know whether it was just now because other countries are getting the capacity to go to space that there's competition again, and maybe that's why we're doing it. Anyway, I'm glad that there's that breadth of participation both internationally and from the private sector on space transportation. So if people want to pay to be tourists, that's fine. But it's certainly all of this competition is leading us to greater ease and reliability in getting to space. And
definitely
where I hope the country is going, or internationally going, because it'll take that probably, is on to Mars. I don't think human exploration of the moon is particularly fruitful. It's going to be particularly fruitful. The moon is a witness of everything that's happened in our solar system, but it's all hidden chemically as adsorbed gases and minerals in the lunar dust, and you can't see much of it. So a robot, if you really wanted to do lunar science, a robot could probably do a better job than humans can, because there's not much variety to see on the moon. But it's probably worth going back to renew our understanding of how to do this, because the institutional memory is gone from the Apollo period. And so stopping there is not a bad idea, but building a long duration facilities on the surface of the moon for humans, I've got mixed feelings about that.
The thing that you said about institutional memory, it actually like struck me with quite some force there. I mean, when we talk about like general companies and the ways in which they operate, for example, the products that even our companies do, that is where we think about this term institutional memory. But I never thought, I guess, in terms of NASA would also have something like institutional memory. And obviously, if we don't continuously renew our endeavors, our interest in those fields, we are bound to lose all that information and all that knowledge that we gained basically in that like decades worth of effort. So I guess it makes completely sense what you just said about space tourism helping us indirectly by increasing the competition, and I guess by keeping that spirit alive in some sense.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Actually, we've been connected with our audience over multiple social media channels, and questions are pouring in. And at this point, I would be doing grave injustice to everybody who's connected with us if I don't take up some of the questions. So, are you ready?
I am ready.
Sure. Okay. So, the first question is, okay, and it looks like this person has done a lot of research about your career. So his question is, you were responsible for activating and operating the Space Lab systems, the Space Lab 2 he's talking about. And within that, you were like responsible for operating IPS, then report manipulator system, assisting with the experiment operations, performing contingency EVA. There are so many responsibilities. So can you talk us a bit through that, like the day-to-day role that you fulfilled over there? And
one of the major experiments, all of the experiments, our space lab were independent. Our experiments in the payload bay operated through computer interfaces from the aft cockpit area. And one of the major experiments was the instrument pointing system, the IPS that you just made. It was built by Dornier in Germany, and essentially you mounted telescopes on it. Our telescopes were all solar telescopes, but later on the IPS flew with stellar telescopes also on other missions. The pointing system had never been properly tested because it couldn't lift itself in 1G. See, in space, this thing there's 1,800 arc seconds across both the sun and the moon. And so this thing pointed to 1 arc second, 1/1800th of the width of the sun. And then the telescopes on it had image motion compensation to go to 100th of an arc second. So and through the Earth's atmosphere, you can only see to a little bit better than an arc second. So this allowed us to look at processes on the sun in different spectral regions at a resolution that you couldn't do from the Earth. So that's the advantage of it. But the problem with it, this was the first flight of it, and the software that controlled the pointing didn't work. That you would lock onto the sun, and then the thing would start precessing around and get wilder and wilder, and then go over to a stop. And it'd do that over and over again. So they kept sending software patches up, and we would have to load them into the machine, into the computers, and to try to get it right. So it wasn't until almost day 3 that we got that to work. And it did work finally. But that was the challenge of the IPS was, this was the first flight, and it took almost half the mission to get a software package up that really allowed it to function the way it was supposed to. I mean, think of it, pointing to 1/1800th of the width of the sun at the same time the shuttle is moving underneath it. That's a difficult challenge. It had star trackers on it, just like an independent satellite.
That's not a difficult challenge. That's an impossible challenge.
Yeah. And then also we're doing plasma physics experiments. We had a satellite that we deployed and fired electron beams down the magnetic field line. We got about a few kilometers away from it and looked at beam particle propagation in a plasma. And this thing could map, the satellite could map the spreading beam as the electron beam went down the magnetic field line. And then we went back and picked it up. So it was a fun mission. It really was. I know when we got home, the scientists who were PIs on all these experiments met us after we landed, and we stayed up all night talking about their experiments. Everybody was so excited about, you know, what they'd gotten.
Every single one of these missions, like performing a dozen of experiments, and bit by bit we add on to our knowledge as humanity, and like with all that accumulating over time, this is how far we have come. That is like really mind-blowing to think about that, like every single experiment that goes onto that mission. Thank you so much.
One thing you wouldn't think about, I was an amateur radio operator. I started back when I was 12 years old, but one of the things we did. Huh?
Are we talking about ham radio? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway. I
Anyway.
didn't know this about you. Please
Oh,
go
yeah.
on, sir.
No, in fact, when they flew Sputnik, I built a receiver so I could hear it going over. But anyway, we fired electron beam down on along magnetic field lines to make like a picket. So it was a grating. And so they actually shot radio signals up off the grating and reflected it to different places just to be sure they could do that.
Wow. Like the thing that is intriguing me the most here is that your experiences, like whether as an astronaut and this hobby that you have, that like amateur radio, they are like both feeding into each other somehow. Both your interests are converging with the story.
They did. I still have an amateur radio, and I just talked to a couple of old engineers of my age. So we get on every Saturday morning and solve the problems of the world, kind of thing. And you know, we still enjoy
on ham radio. On ham radio. That's wonderful, sir. Another question that we have received from one of our listeners is, okay, like there's been such a renewed interest in colonizing Mars, going to Mars. Like that is something that captures the imagination of everybody.
Yes.
Like what developments do you see in our mission to colonize and inhabit Mars?
Oh, I think going to Mars is really exciting. It solves several problems, or it requires solving several problems. This long duration space flight, because it's a 2-year thing, at least, we don't really know how to maintain human health, both the bone mass issues and also issues of maintaining your immune systems. Because if you're in a closed system and you don't have anything coming into it, I found this in Antarctica, everybody would get rid of their colds, and then when somebody would come in from the outside, everybody would catch a cold again. So somehow on long duration missions and in closed systems, you're going to have to introduce some threats to keep your immune system going. So, and then there's the radiation involvement. You've got to solve those issues. So, and then when you get to Mars, it's an interesting planet geologically, much like the Earth is. It's been active. It has a Grand Canyon of its own. It has ice caps in the polar areas. It probably has buried ice under a lot of the dust, and so it's going to be a fascinating place to explore. So, yeah, I'm at 87. I'm not, or 78. I'm sorry, at 78. I'm not sure I'll be able to see us go there, but I sure wish I could.
Scientists are working towards it, and I am pretty sure that you're going to see it happen like really soon.
I hope
so. Actually, that is something that even I can't wait for. Like generations are not a barrier. Everybody from small little kids to people who are like a bit older in age, everybody is looking forward to that point where like humanity can finally say we have crossed that level. So another question is, what according to you are the challenges of like operating in a zero gravity environment, and like how do astronauts cope with it?
It's the other way. It's so easy that it spoils you.
No resistance, I guess.
Yeah, we practiced it in the Vomit Comet, that airplane that does parabolas. But you only get 20 seconds at a time in 0G in that. And then if you're in a suit like you would be on the moon, the suit weighs, your total weight with the suit is about 400 pounds. And then when you do a 2G pullout, you're not going to be able to stand up. So you get this 20 seconds and then the technicians run out and grab you and throw you on your back on the floor so they can do the pull out. Now, when you get to the top, they run out, grab you and stand you up again, and you get another 20 seconds. The other way you practice it is in the water tanks. And so we spent a lot of time, both in those days, in the Marshall's water tank. It was the big one. Now Johnson Space Center also has a big water tank of its own. It's hard work because in a pressure suit, you're always fighting against the volume of the suit. When you move your arm, they've designed really good suits, but when you move your arm or your hand or your fingers, you're changing the volume slightly, and so that is work, and so you do get tired. So that's the challenge of working in a suit, but being in a zero gravity is just delightful. It's after a couple of days, the first couple of days, you don't want to move your head too much. Some of the crew got sick. I was fortunate not to get sick, but after the first couple of days, you just dive through the hatch and you float around. And even when you're sleeping, we were in these cabinets, and I'd put on a headset. My daughter plays the violin, she still plays the violin. I had music from that on my headset, and I would just float around inside this closet, and I had no trouble sleeping, and it was just delightful. Again, the problem of zero gravity is it's so nice, but you lose all your muscle tone, and your cardiovascular system weakens because you're not pumping against anything.
Actually, I'll tell you something about me. I weigh 19 kgs, 90, and I've been trying to do a pull-up for the last 3 years. One single pull-up. Like, if I can do that, that would be all that I need. This is like one of my life's dreams. Yeah. I guess, like, after listening to your story, I think an easier way for me to accomplish that goal would be just to go to space and perform a pull-up there.
Absolutely.
So I guess that wraps up all the questions we have from the audience. But personally, I would like to ask you a couple of more things.
Sure.
First of all, because I can see that a lot of people are listening to us, and as I mentioned earlier, our demographic also includes some very young kids who are like extremely interested in space. So I want you to like directly address them and just say a couple of words of encouragement for them, so that like they can go on, and if they like really want to live out their dreams, so they would love to hear from you.
Yes, I encourage people to have these dreams and try to see them realized, understanding that your desires may change with time, but it gives you motivation in these dreams to study your math and take the grades seriously, because there could be an outcome of that. The situation with going to space, at least right now, is so much that you have to be in the right place at the right time to be able to do it. But a lot of people are doing it, and it is possible. I have a good friend who's the Dean of Engineering at UM Ann Arbor right now. And he was wanting to be an astronaut. He's a lot younger than I am. He was wanting to be an astronaut when he was young. And he came to the university, and he did research in plasma physics, space engines. That's what it was really he was doing, building plasma engines. And one of the invitations, NASA will put out an invitation and say, we are going to hire 10 people with these kinds of skill sets. Please, if you're interested, apply. And that'll be the next class. So it came out at a time in his career when he could have done it. He was very qualified. NASA, he's African American, and NASA would have seen that as an advantage. And he's a very, very extremely bright fellow. But he decided that he liked what he was doing so much that he didn't apply. And it doesn't regret not applying, but that's what I'm saying. The things that are important to you will change during your life. the reason people say, why did you leave NASA in 1988? NASA is a large team activity. It's a group thing, and it's sort of military in our time. It's less so now, but it was very hierarchical. The people that decided didn't do, and the people that did the work didn't get to decide. And I reached the point in my life when I wanted to get up in the morning and decide what I thought was important and do it. And I could do that in the university. And so to me, I've enjoyed my 32 years now, 24 of them in Ann Arbor, and then the last 8 years in UM Dearborn. I've enjoyed that every bit. In fact, in many ways, more than I enjoyed the NASA. I enjoyed flying airplanes. I enjoyed the space flight, but the environment there is not, I don't mean it's toxic, but you're very much working for somebody else. And at some point, you just sort of want to work for yourself. And so it was time to go. So things change, your ideas change of what you want to do. I'm sorry, that is a very long answer.
No, that is really good, because the youngsters who are dreaming of going into this field, they need to hear this, and from somebody who has actually been there and done that. So I'm pretty sure that everybody who is listening to you would take these words very seriously and ponder on them, and maybe they will come up with something out of these, and this is going to help them a lot if they decide to pursue a career in this field.
I hope so. The big thing is our lives are long enough, if we're lucky, that we can have several careers. And so there's a time in my 20s and 30s where going to space was the greatest thing. And then as I got older, doing things that I had more control of was more important to me.
Definitely. So that was a really great answer. I mean, I started pondering on it right here, right now. I should do that later on. Right now, I've got another question for you. This India Science Month, for example, the event that we're organizing, we've talked to so many eminent personalities over here, and the feedback that we have received from crowd, it has been really wonderful, because people, young kids, and people from every demographic, they are coming in telling us that it has done something, especially in this atmosphere of COVID and everything. It has done a lot in order to rekindle their interest, their spirit in science. So personally, I want to know from you that events like these, for example, what role do these events like these they play in raising the consciousness, the scientific consciousness of the masses, and helping us as a society to...
Yeah, you were a little bit broken up there, but I think I understood the question. To me, these kinds of things are really important. One of the things scientists don't do is talk to the public enough. So there gets to be a lot of myths about how you do science. So to the extent, there's more of this, what they call now public participation in science, where people can make measurements and then we'll work together and use the data to interpret it. And that's important, because a lot of the misinformation and the conspiracy theories and things that are going around right now are probably, well, I believe partly because they haven't been exposed to the rigor of how science is done and why it's important to use data to drive what you want to do. And so anything that would encourage young people to go into any of the STEM fields, I think is really valuable.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that feedback. My last question to you, sir, would be, what's next for you? What's next for Professor Anthony England?
I'm in my retirement. It's called a furlough year, and I retire next summer. And so I give some talks and help a couple of the departments at the university. But most of my time now is spent in preparing for retirement, which is a lot of, it's actually kind of fun. I'm looking forward to it. I have a a small airplane. It's like a Piper Cub. And so I fly, I don't know whether you know what a Piper Cub is. It's really, it's steel tube and fabric. So it's really, it's a modern version of the Piper Cub. And I enjoy flying it. We have a lake house. This picture in my background is off the deck of the lake house, and that's Lake Michigan in the background. I'm not there now. That's just a picture. So my wife and I have good friends, and we'll have time to spend time with them, and we have toys to play with, and so I think we're very lucky.
So whatever you do, I wish you a very happy retirement in all these endeavors of yours. I hope that you are as successful as you were in your career. It was such a pleasure talking to you, such an honor talking to you. The only regret, I guess, that I have about this evening is that it is happening over a Zoom webinar, because if we were present in an actual auditorium right now, I'm pretty sure it would be like bursting with standing ovation, because you have like lit not just our imaginations, but also our hearts on fire with your words. Thank you so much for being here with us, sir. It was like wonderful having you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Professor England, on behalf of the entire team,
Shruti, I think you're breaking
Festival,
up. Okay, we have you now.
Yeah, I'm back. Professor England, on behalf of the entire team at ISF, just want to thank you for your time and efforts for being a part of this session. Like Abhimanyu rightly pointed out, it was such an honor hosting you at ISF. A key takeaway from your session that I personally would like to highlight is that in our lifetime, you rightly pointed out, we have many careers that we can actively explore. We want all our attendees to know that there's so much to do in science and technology. It's not restricted. There's just so much happening, and it's always open to everybody. That's the best part about science. That's the beauty of it, that science and technology is truly open to everyone to explore and be a part of. And Professor England, by hosting you at our festival, we have gotten the chance to provide a role model to our attendees. You have like Abhimanyu said, we couldn't host you at our festival offline, but through the Zoom event, we managed to dig a little into your into your past and the present and the future, and we were able to really you were able to inspire so many of us, and I think that's the role of credible role models like you. So thank you so much, means the world to us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor England. Thank you, Abhimanyu, for conducting this session. It was an honor having you interview Professor England. And with that, we have come to the end of our last session for ISMO 2021. Well, it's such a surreal feeling. It was a month-long festival which covered so many talks, panel discussions, roundtables, workshops, activities for kids as well as adults. There was something to do in space, robotics, healthcare. We also covered topics of general science and science communication. And I think it was a very, very exciting 1 month of science and technology. We tried to be the one-stop destination for everybody, whoever is interested in science and technology. We really wanted you all to experience science to the fullest. And we hope that we were able to provide a month-long adventure for all you science enthusiasts. We hope to host you at our festival offline. With the pandemic, we really hope that things get better in the future and we are able to host this festival on ground, and we would encourage everybody to join us with their friends and family. Do stay updated with all our sessions on our social media channels. You can follow us. You can write to us on our email. We'll just leave it in the chat box. And please make sure that you visit our website for all our upcoming events. And I just want to thank you all for being a part of our festival. Thanks for taking out the time. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for being involved with all our sessions. And thank you for celebrating science with us. Science and society cannot be separated. They are intermingled. One is incomplete without the other. So, in our attempt at making science more accessible to society, this festival aims at being there for all of you. And we truly hope that you have enjoyed celebrating science with all of us. While this festival was virtual, we do hope we're able to host you on ground. And with that, we've come to the end of this session. Thank you so much and have a great night.